Okay, hello everybody. This is podcast Training Without Conflict number 28, and today I have the privilege to have Steve White with me, so we can talk dogs hopefully for a very long time, because I've been waiting for this for quite some time. Like we end up meeting each other here and there, being training, being police conferences and so on, but finally we really got the opportunity. So Steve, really appreciate that you coming in. And what I instead of me doing what typically happens and making those introductions, I think you can do much better job introducing yourself to the people that don't know you.
Geez, where do I begin? I started working with dogs, making money at it before I realized I was doing it, back when I was a kid, and I lived in New York City for a while, and people asked me to walk their dog for them when they couldn't do it, because we met each other down at the park by my house. Left that alone for a while, but later on in life, I just craved having a dog and wanted to work. And next thing you know, I'm taking obedience classes, doing search and rescue back in 1974. And the instructor asked me if I want to become part of his search and rescue organization, because he's the training director for the German Shepherd Search Dogs of Washington State. I did, but basically that meant going out and getting buried in mounds of snow and waiting for dogs to come find me.
Sorry to interrupt, but so searching and tracking and all that's like first love for you. I mean, that's like right on.
You know what? That's I was an only child back before, an only child of a single mother, long before Murphy Brown made that hit. And my dog was always my companion. I'd come home from school and my dog was there. And so, and I contend that a lot of us dog people, like the ones who have the shirt that says I, and then there's a heart, and then there's the name of a breed underneath it, right? The ones who say dog is my co-pilot bumper sticker on their car, or who rescued who. All of us dog people like this. Maybe we're dog people because we're not so much people, and that dogs were there when people weren't for us, either because they couldn't be or we weren't really. But one way or the other, I got to own my own stuff and say that, dogs were always there for me. Even before that in New York, when I was a kid in Ohio before that, my dog was my constant playmate. We go out in the woods behind our house and romp around. Back in the days when kids could go out unsupervised and nobody worried about it. And so then I did the search and rescue thing for a while, but then I found out that there was such a thing as a police canine unit, and Seattle had one back then. It was fairly new. This was 1974, and the unit was started in 1971. And I wanted to know more. And the sergeant for the canine unit, Gary Berman, took me under his wing and became like a surrogate father for me. Tim Teakin, one of the handlers, was a mentor to me. Larry Franklin, their training master, was a mentor to me. Tom Miller became a mentor to me, the people that were leading the training thing. And I said, this training thing is cool. I want to do this. But they looked at me and they said, you know what? You need to grow up, kid. I was 19 years old. And they said 4 years of polite penal servitude in the Army would do you good. I suggest you go in and become a military policeman and see if you like this copping thing, whether you really want to do that or not. So I did. I go into MP school. I get a guarantee for MP school. That means I got a 3-year commitment. And but no guarantee for dog school. So I get through school and MP school, and they ask for volunteers for dog school. I stick my grimy little hand in the air, and for some reason the first sergeant picked me, and I got to go along with 2 other people. And the very first dog, this was 1975, Yvonne, 1975. And we go in there and we all march into our kennel and we meet our dogs. They walk us all in. And then we all, the last guy in line stops at the first kennel. Next last guy stops at the second kennel, all the way down the line until everybody stops at a kennel. Then the instructor says, left turn or left face, meet your dog. And there I was staring at what I thought, because I'd had nothing but German Shepherds, and my actual dog I had before I went in the Army was a German Shepherd Malamute cross. And I'm looking at this little orange thing that I had never seen before, didn't know what it was, named Astro. Did not know what I was getting into. Oh, that dog taught me a lot. And that was my introduction to the military method. My obedience had been the Keeler method. The military method is not far removed from it. You've seen it before because that's where you started, back in your home country, and it had been in use for a long time. And then things along with that dog were okay as long as I didn't put demands on him. But as soon as I started putting demands on him, he's like, no, you have not earned the right to do that. and it really culminated in the down. And that dog, in the process of teaching it down, bit the crap out of me. This whole story is about him is I could go forever just talking about this. We could waste an hour talking about that dog and how he's the one. But after I got bit by that dog and put back 2 weeks in school, so I couldn't come back with him. I had to come back to another dog. He wound up biting the next handler right through his bicep. They could put a swab in one side and pull it out the other.
Oof.
And then they gave him to a Marine for sentry school, because sentry dogs didn't have to be taught the out. They just got choked off. And I see this Marine at the post bowling alley with a big bandage around his neck. Dog bit him in the neck.
Whew.
That dog was a handful. But I will say the seed he planted in me was, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. And also, the seed he planted at that time that didn't really take fruit and didn't bear fruit until later was, the dog is always right. In other words, the dog will perform to the level trained. And if there's a problem that doesn't meet your expectations, that just means you have more training to do. You asked something you didn't prepare the dog to deliver. And so those two things stuck with me through the years and didn't really grab a hold. But from the very beginning, I started experimenting. And I don't know if you ever saw a book by Patricia Gale Burnham called Play Training Your Dog, written in 1980.
No, I was still in Europe at that time.
It's still available as a used book on Amazon. But that book changed me, because the military was dead set against, they would use food for detector dogs, but they didn't want to use for obedience, and they didn't want play used as a reinforcer. It was just petting and praise, and that was it. That dog should do that because your petting and praise was so valuable to it. And then after I got out of the Army in 1979, I read this book, and I realized it wasn't the answer, but it propelled me in the right direction. I realized at that point, play was really powerful. And I started trying to take advantage of it. I'll be candid. I spent over 4.5 decades as a cop of one flavor or another. After being an MP, I wound up working for a small department, didn't have a canine unit, went to a sheriff's office in Western Washington, Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. And within 6 months, I had a dog and I was working there. And I had a great time. I had enough experience as a cop that I could be effective with a dog, and it worked well. And then from there, I went to Seattle because that's where I really wanted to be. And within 3 years, I was working a dog there, which is unusual because Seattle system, it usually takes you 5 to 10 years before you get a dog. But because I'd already had established a relationship and I was willing to do work other people weren't willing to do, they didn't want to be trainers. They just wanted to go out there and catch bad guys with their dogs. I was willing to give up some of that because I'm one of those weird nerds that like training, that likes modifying behavior. So most of the rest of my career was in and out of canine. Most of that 45 years was in canine, working with dogs. But I'm going to tell you, I don't have 45 years experience. I've got maybe 25 years experience, because there's a difference between 20 years experience and 1 year of experience 20 times over.
Oh, good one.
And that,
I like it.
you know, for a long time, I tried doing things the way I had been taught, which was minor tweaks, this and that. And I didn't realize I had to make bigger, more powerful fundamental shifts. And that, so the change in me started I want to say maybe actually, I got more like 30 years experience because the first 15 years of that, but it started around 1990, 91. I started realizing that things had to change, and it really shifted when I got my first 2 patrol dogs I trained, and we brought in clickers with them, and that was 95, I think, 95, late 95 into 96. And so that's it. I retired from law enforcement in 2021. I still have my consulting business, Proactive Canine. I'm doing certifications for explosive dogs for the federal government right now on a program that they've got. I provide expert witness services and consulting services. Basically, right now I sell knowledge. I don't sell dogs. I don't sell equipment.
Yeah, like I mean, you definitely, from what I see, staying active in the dog industry for sure, and especially in the police world with presentations and in different conferences and stuff, which is really good because I think it's very much needed. And in fact, that was the last time, I don't know where was it. Like, I'm not like you. I wish I can have this kind of memory with 1975 with this person, with this name, and I'm like, I cannot remember somebody that I met a month ago. Like, I just don't have that. I don't know where was the last conference.
So
I can say Minnesota or Michigan, and I can be confused either way.
If you close your eyes right now, can you see, if I tell you visualize your mother, can you see your mother's face if you close your eyes?
Yeah.
I can't. I have a condition called aphantasia, which is a lack of the ability to visualize. So instead of being able to visualize things, I make lists. I didn't realize this until just last year. I found out, I realized this is how I've navigated my life. There are things other people remember because they can see where they left their keys. And if I can't see where I left my keys, so I have to go through a list of places I have been to do this. I can't, I love my wife dearly, but I can't close my eyes and see her. I can close my eyes and I can describe her characteristics because I have that list in there. And I will recognize her when I see her. I will recognize you as Ivan as soon as I see you, because I've been seeing you since I first got the game DVD. You know, when I got the Obedience Without Conflict DVDs back then, that face was indelibly etched on my mind. And you
especially my accent.
You haven't, and the accent's is not as thick as it used to be. Yeah. You're picking up on American lingo pretty good, brother.
It's amazing how the brain really, I know we both are obsessed with learning, and the brain is just amazing thing. And I will tell you something that I think I haven't really talked on any podcast or anything like that, as far as how my brain works. Like, people would say, well, you just meet too many people. You know, they're just nice to me because I don't remember. So, I mean, literally, sometimes I have to walk and my wife will be like, this person, and we met them there and there, and I feel relieved, because otherwise I really appear like I'm either like just looking down on people or totally ignorant, or, it's not a good thing. And I try very hard, but it's just my brain doesn't work that way. Now, then they will say, well, but with dogs, you must be really, you know their birthdays and pedigree and names, and I don't. I just don't. I don't.
No. What does that matter when the dog's on the field with you?
Right.
When you're on the training field with with the dog, the pedigree doesn't matter. The name only matters as a cue. What matters more is the interaction.
Right.
Those you remember.
So what I
many of those
remember,
remember.
even there, it gets very weird to me. And you tell me what you think about that. But even when I train, like I realized at one point how my brain works. And let's say I have a dog that I have from a puppy or whatever it came, and I've been working for a year or 2 years. I can remember certain moments, some aha moments, some really difficult moments, but overall, the way I work with dogs is I remember what is really important for the where I was a month ago, where I want to go. So I almost want to call it that I'm really in the present within a month in the past. But I don't really go further back unless I need it. Unless I'm like, okay, I need to peel that onion. I need to really go as far as I can go to see why we are doing what we are doing today. But typically, I can give you like mathematically strong, like what happens in like the strongest details in the current within a week to 2 weeks, and then a month, and from there on, I kind of put it aside, and I think I put it aside because I pay so much attention of what happens right now. And it's I don't know if anybody else trains dogs like that.
So let me see if I got this right. Essentially, when you come to a dog, let's say when you come bring a dog out of the field to start training with it, you have the ability to know exactly where that dog was the last time you worked with it. You remember its state of arousal, what motivates it. Each dog is indelibly etched on you in those moments by their behavior, by how things unfolded and what seems like the next step.
Right. Yeah, like highly adaptable for right now.
So I'm kind of like that. Now, I don't know if you do it visually because you have that ability to do it, but I make lists. So mentally, I come into where a dog was and I do that. And I know also that I can't trust my memory. So every training session starts with a where are we at exercise. I baseline. I don't start trying to shape right away. I always do a cold assessment of where we are to see if my recollection of where they are. And in fact, I have a form that I use that is a fluency assessment. So I can tell precisely over 7 different criteria of fluency where that dog was at the last time because I have the records on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't trust my memory. So I go that way. And I'm fairly comfortable with it. And the baselining process gets me right back in sync with them. You probably can jump into shaping faster than I can with that. But everybody adapts. If they're going to be effective, they adapt their training to their proclivities and their dog's proclivities. Anything other than adaptation is going to be a problem because assumptions get in the way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like I feel like it's there is some degree of advantage of how I'm extremely comfortable in a moment of training, like extremely comfortable. And it doesn't mean that I know where the session's gonna go or anything like that, but I'm extremely comfortable knowing that it will go places, and I'm very adaptable to wherever it goes.
So, and here's where most people get in trouble. They come in with a goal in mind. They have a shaping plan. They have a goal behavior for that exercise. And in the process of, because we're goal-oriented creatures, we make to-do lists. We make your short-term plans to support long-range plans, support 5-year plans, support 25-year plans. That's the kind of species we are. Dogs are in the moment. And the trouble is, sometimes we come in with our plans and it interferes with the beauty of the zen of the moment of what that dog is ready to offer you. You're trying to force it to go one direction, even without using force. Even if you're using nothing but food and treats and toys, you're trying to take the vector of the animal's behavior in one direction. And the dog says, I'm really jazzed about this direction. And we could, and you could use that. And unfortunately, a lot of times we miss beautiful moments because we're too busy trying to force outcomes.
Right. Beautifully said. Yeah, very, very true. Now, one of the things that it's very interesting for me talking with you is that you are very very well known in the police world, not just in the country, but outside the country. But there is a whole other side that you're just as well known and as high reputation in the positive reinforcement or force-free or whatever we want to call it community. Mm-hmm. And I know listening to some of the podcasts, and I was going to go back to the book and see, but somewhere I heard that you actually, Karen Pryor had mentioned you in the Don't Shoot the Book or Don't Shoot the Dog book. And then I know that you've presented at ClickerExpos and tell us a little bit more about this side. Because that's not something common.
Remember, I told you that Astro, that first dog in the Army, planted that seed about there has to be a better way. So from the very beginning, I was always looking for that better way. And luckily, when I got into the unit in Seattle, my mentor, the training master at that time was Tim Teakin, who had taken over training following Larry Franklin's departure. Tim was also inclined to use science to support his methods rather than just tradition. In other words, and this is one of the things that I really appreciate about Tim's mentorship is he not only did what worked, and he was probably more likely to apply force to a dog than I was at that point, but still, he understood everybody's got to find their way to this. And if somebody doesn't, then you say, okay, we're going to do it this way. But for the most part, he was pretty open-minded. And so I stumbled upon the first edition of Don't Shoot the Dog by accident. I was visiting my father. I think I told the story to Nick Benker. So if you go to Nick Benker's podcast, you get this. But I stumbled on the book, and I realized this tiny little book had 22 sentences in it that if you really internalize them, you could train any animal to do anything it was mentally and physically capable of. And that is the 10 laws of shaping, eight ways to get rid of unwanted behavior, which is now the 8 ways to modify behavior in the new version, and then the 4 conditions of stimulus control. If you understood those 22 sentences, you could shape just anything. By the way, those 8 ways of getting rid of unwanted behavior, 4 were called good fairies and 4 were called bad fairies. 4 were repetitive and 4 were aversive. So, I mean, even in that book, but I realized that summary of those sentences was like magic. So I wanted to find out more. So I started doing some research on what was then, I had an AOL account back in those days, and I started looking for Karen Pryor, and found out she lived in North Bend, Washington, which is right down I-90 from Seattle to, east of I-90 on Seattle. I found some people that knew her in the dog community. I asked them, okay, would you ask her, if I gave them my number, I said, would you have her call me? She called me. I told her I wanted to talk to her. She invited me up to her house. That time she was married to John Lindbergh, the son of Lindbergh, the pilot. And she just opened her arms and she said, what do you want to know? And I said, everything. But I'm trying to optimize our training program. I will one day be the training master for this unit. That's my goal, and that's my mentor has a plan to retire, so I know that it's in the future, and I want to use science to support what we're doing. Next thing I know, I'm leaving her house with an armload of books and tapes. She gave me Pam Reed's Accelerated Learning. She gave me some old videos that she made with Gary Wilkes in the old Click and Treat days when they were working together doing their seminars. And then I saw what she was doing. And I later showed her some videos of what we had done with some of our dogs. And she said, "Oh, this is cool. Would you show it to some of our people if we're doing this thing up in Kamloops, British Columbia?" So I drive up to Kamloops. I spend about 5 minutes up on the stage showing video of dogs doing tracking off lead with a protection exercise. And next thing I know, she invites me to another one, a West Coast Clicker weekend at Plausibilities down in Tukwila, Washington. And then from there, I get an invitation to do APDT, the Association of, at that time it was pet dog trainers. Now it's professional dog trainers, King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And then I wind up with another APDT in San Diego. And then in 2003, Karen and her business manager at that time, the CEO of her company, they start something called the ClickerExpos. And that was in Chicago, the first one. Largely supported also by Ken Ramirez, who's now the vice president for Karen Pryor Clicker Training. Ken was at that time the training director for the Shed Aquarium.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, I'm a regular on the staff of ClickerExpo. My wife and I co-teach there together. So Jen and I were teaching with ClickerExpo. We did a bunch of things like, a scent work class, but basically our bread and butter was a class on teaching a dog how to retrieve a hot dog without eating it, which is, an impulse control exercise. And the goal wasn't to get it in the 90 minutes we were allotted for the workshop. It was to show you that you actually had to break this down to a bunch of component skills and probably a globalized concept of impulse control, which is gone out of favor nowadays. Everybody says there's no such thing as impulse control. It's really all stimulus control. I would argue maybe not. I think impulse control is a good thing for a dog to have. It doesn't always have to be that you're working so hard to keep them under impulse control. They probably should know it's probably not a good idea to chase rabbits every time they see one, and they don't need to check in with you on that, but that's just me. But and then they started the Karen Pryor Academy, and so we're on the advisory board with that to help come up with curriculum. And then Jen and I ran some of the academy classes. We kind of parted ways with Karen Pryor Clicker Training in 2010, and I wanted to focus on my law enforcement career. So and since then, I've been focused on, my own unit and providing services for government and industry more than I have been in the pet dog realm. I still do a little bit. I do stuff for like training clubs that want to do a tracking class because my approach to tracking is designed for urban tracking. So for people who want to do the VST test for the AKC, it kind of adapts well. And so that's about it. But
that's about it. That's pretty wild. That's a long. I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff. And being like, I actually wasn't aware that you were that active. And I mean, you still make some presentations and like appearances, correct? Or no?
Most of my work, most of my stuff right now is working in the law enforcement or the government sector. But like I did a tracking seminar for a dog training club here in Washington State last year. Don't have anything scheduled in the private sector this year. But I have the Western States Police Canine Association seminar coming up in Reno this September. I'm working
Do you
with
have
the
a topic already or no?
Beg pardon?
Do you already have a topic what you're presenting or?
I think it's going to be urban tracking, and I think I'm going to do. I'm trying to remember. I'd have to look at my phone to see which because he asked for 2 topics and then he said yeah to both of them, and one of them, because right now the police canine community is under really heavy scrutiny, and some would even say outright attack. Some people are saying it's justified, other will not. But the Marshall Project, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's got an active campaign about police canine. They're advocates trying to shut down the use of biting dogs all around the country, period. And I can understand that. But I think that that constitutes throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That in the process of doing that, you're going to have some unintended consequences that you probably don't want. And so I've been working with the United States Police Canine Association. I'm part of their best practices working group, along with Gene Ramirez, who's the attorney that represents the USPCA and a bunch of California agencies, Scott Sargent, a former captain with Los Angeles Police Department, who ran their use of force review process, David Furland, who was chief in Manchester, who started the New Hampshire Canine Academy, and Don Slavic, and John Kerwick, who ran the New York Transit Police Canine Program, retired captain there, and Don Slavic, who is the executive director. And together we meet every week on a Monday. And we kind of talk, we look at the latest canine cases that are coming in, the latest articles, see how they can be used. We're going to be presenting this year actually at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP conference in San Diego in October. Now that took us 2 or 3 years to get them to say, look, we've been trying to tell them, you need to pay attention. We have to make some changes. And so we're in there advocating for change in the police canine community right now, upping the level. I mean, seriously, you work with canine units on a regular basis. What do you, would you agree that there aren't many canine units out there that wouldn't benefit from more and more effective training? That the vast majority could benefit from more and more effective training?
I think this is universal. I think we all never should just feel comfortable like but definitely, and that's one of the things that comes to mind now that I'm listening to you. I mean, you almost see 2 extremes, and you're not only seeing them, you're part of, and then part of. Mm-hmm. And somehow you're navigating and you're seeing some really incorrect police training, and sometimes it's appropriate to interfere and sometimes it's not your place. And probably the same with the totally force-free. I'm sure that also can go off rail. So how do you do it? This is not easy.
So, remember I told you that Don't Shoot the Dog appealed to me because there were 22 sentences that if you learn those, you could train any animal to do anything it's mentally and physically capable of. Those sentences were not methods. They were principles. So I try to be a principle-based trainer as opposed to a method-based trainer. And the first principle is I let the dog tell me what's going to work. That's my first principle. The dog is the expert in what it's prepared to deliver. Nobody is better qualified than the dog to assess what it's prepared to deliver. You just have to be attuned to it and willing to listen. And I think that applies to anybody, whether they're going to use a clicker in treats, a verbal marker and toys, or nothing more than an aversive tool. At some point, you have to realize that the principles, you will be, and this is Karen Pryor told me this in my second trip to her house, that every method is effective to the extent that it complies with the principles. Even methods she didn't like will be effective to the extent they comply with the principles. And so we have to understand that. And so what I've realized through the years is, and this is one that makes me, like you said, I'm known in these different communities. That I don't really give a rip about that, but I think basically there's not much middle ground about me. People either like what I'm saying or they really don't like they really like what I'm saying, or they really don't like what I'm saying. There's not much middle ground. And I found that people at one point who liked what I say don't like what I say anymore. And I found other people that didn't like what I said before now like what I say. So I've given up worrying about what people think about what I say. And I try to be consistent with the principle. And that is, again, the dog's always right. But I'm also, this is one that has come to me. I can tell you that the most reliable predictor of the outcome with a dog is the skill of the trainer, more than the tools or the method. That if the trainer is sufficiently skilled, and it's not just about getting the behavior. I'm not just talking about the effectiveness of getting a behavior. I'm talking about the dog enjoying life and having a good and having a process. Maybe not that process might have some challenges to overcome, some uncomfortable things to work through, but one way or the other, the skill of the trainer is more likely to do this. And I'll tell you, one of the places where this became apparent to me is I gave a talk. I want to say, was it Davis, California? I think it was in Davis, California. And I remember the name of the talk was Alpha Schmalpha. And it was basically saying, you don't need to worry about alpha theory. All right. Because it isn't a direct correlate to what we do with dogs. But some students of Michael Ellis's came to that class, and there were a bunch of purely positive people and people who have been that. And I'll tell you what, if you saw those dogs interacting together and you didn't know who trained which, you wouldn't know who trained which. And at that point, I'm saying, okay, this is something to consider. If the outcome, and you see these dogs moving through life, having a good time, enjoying people, enjoying other dogs, going through this, and you can't tell who trained which way they were trained, all of a sudden you have to rethink some of the things you do. Now, some people will say that their ethical principles are, that's fine. I just don't want to apply force to get there. It made me pause and think for a while, to sit there and watch this happen, to see people and their dogs interacting in the hallways at this place where we taught the class. And I just, it was among other things. And I'd see the same things. You don't get to see police canines playing together much. One of the only places I get to see it, if you know anybody who, and you, Stu Hilliard, when you did your podcast with Stuart Hilliard, he alluded to PSP America, which was tied to the PSP school in Stukenbrock in Germany. And one of their daily activities that was taught to me by Brian Am, one of the other people who went there, he was a Calgary police officer who went there for the Calgary Olympics in advance of the Calgary Olympics to get their unit up to snuff with explosive detection and patrol dogs. Brian was a quiet genius. And one of the things he taught us that he learned from the PSP school was Hundeauslaufen, basically, which is long walk with dogs. So at the start of the day, everybody muzzle up their dogs. They all go for a walk together. And the dogs learn to socialize with each other. If there's a scrum between a couple of dogs, the handlers go in there, intervene quickly, and get the things moving. And eventually the dogs learn, it's not worth fighting about. Let's go. There's way more fun. And they get to the point where these dogs will actually have like soccer matches with each other. And you will not see a fight over the ball other than trying to move the ball, but you don't see them shifting off and redirecting. Not all dogs are amenable to that, but it works with a broad enough array of them that those were the most interactively social police dogs I've seen. I haven't seen American dogs, many of them getting to the point where you can have that degree of freedom with them. And we would do that work, that half-day workshop that would end with one of those muzzle walks with handlers at Bob Eden's seminars, the International Police Canine Conferences. Brian instructed for that, brought this technique in there. We would do it, and I was one of the instructors who would lead that walk. And then it's kind of fun to watch. See these dogs who for all their life so far have been restrained from interacting with other dogs and not really getting the chance to all of a sudden be free to do it. Yes, they're muzzled, but that winds up being an avenue towards them getting more and more comfortable with the socialization process. It just is a tool that works in there. And, I'm a firm believer that the muzzle is a critical tool for street worthiness for patrol dogs. So it wound up being a double win as far as I was concerned.
No, and taking a dog on a walk, like the type of walk that you're describing, and even if it's not a group and a unit and more dogs, but even if it's just the handler and the dog, and I'm not talking the walk on, blocks around the street, but like go in the woods, go on a trail, take an hour out of your time to just be you and your dog to walk. I am really a big advocate of when we talk about bonding and a lot of qualities and a lot of dynamics between the dog and a person. Mm-hmm. Something very natural happens without being forced, just because we are walking together, you and I, in the woods. And it happens one time, two times, becomes a little bit of routine. And without having to even train, I find that you just become so much more in tune and close to each other, simply because of this kind of walking.
And, that's one of the pieces of connection that a lot of police canine handlers miss. They don't really get to walk with their dogs that way. They'll drive around all day long with them in their car. They get them out, do some work. They get them out, give them a potty break. They get them out, do some training. And then they're back driving around in the car. Their connection's strong, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But they miss out on the ability to take walks. Now, I will say that I feel blessed that the handlers I had in my unit in my last stint there were the kind of guys who would take their dogs on places like that and would take them to the beach, take them to a walk, go do that. And it was controversial. Well, they're not on duty. What happens if the dog bites somebody? Are we going to get sued? The department said, yes, you will. It's a department dog. This is going to happen. I said, but the cost benefit analysis, the handler being able to do this is that. And they're getting paid for home kennel care anyway. So why not let them use that time this way? And that for me, as long as they understand the rules about safety and all that stuff, it winds up being so powerful. And, you talk about connection. Most canine handlers in this country are at war with their dogs and they don't even know it.
Right. And don't even know it. It's very, very correct to say.
And for most of them, I will say, here's a simple test. You stand here. We'll have a decoy in a suit, sleeve, whatever you want, 30 feet away. Send that dog out to seize that person. Go ahead and wait till they've got a good solid grip and stand there and watch it for a few seconds. And then I say, now, just go walk up to your dog. What happens 95% of the time when that handler walks up to the dog?
The dog spins away.
The dog spins away from the handler, trying to interpose the decoy between the dog and the handler. Why? Because that dog knows this guy's coming up to end the fun game. This dog thinks his day-to-day life is the best game of hide and seek and tug of war ever. And that hairless primate that he spends all his time with winds up being the discriminative stimulus for the fun ending so many times. And the dog doesn't realize and the handler doesn't realize that they're in conflict. They just think that's natural, the way it should be. And so we can go through some exercises pretty quickly in an afternoon, and you can clean that up, at least in that context, not everywhere, but in that context, you can clean that up and show them what's possible.
Can open the door. You can open the door.
Yeah. And you do it without any force. You do it without it's all, hey, guess what? The cavalry's here. And if I have to, I'll back that decoy into a corner of a fence. So the dog only has 90 degrees of play. So the dog can swing that way. And the handler walks up to him and doesn't do anything except give the dog praise. Good boy. That's it. Nice, calm, relaxed stuff. And occasionally we'll reach down and give that dog nice, long, gentle strokes along the body. And the dog starts going, oh, I don't have to worry about this. Occasionally touch the collar, but don't pull him on, all that good stuff. And eventually the dog goes, okay. And then the handler goes, we're in this together, buddy. Come on, let's go. We'll deal with this guy together. Okay. And next thing you know, the dog says, okay, you really are the cavalry. That's good. At least here, now, in this moment, because dogs are context sensitive learners. You better take it somewhere else on the road if you want it to stick. A lot of places, I think probably no less than 30 for it to really stick. And you better never get to the point where your dog is back to thinking that you're there to make the party end. It's tough. It's a tough mental change to make, but you can show somebody pretty quickly that the potential is there, the possibility of a level of connection, a level of trust between the dog and you can be taken. Now, can people still function with dogs that do what they did there? Yes, they can. They can function, but I say suboptimally. And our goal, I'm a firm believer in the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, the continual pursuit of improvement. Perfection's not possible, but you can always try for it. You're always trying the next step, trying to improve one way or the other. The only reason I got to be a trainer and is anything is because I made more mistakes than the other guys. And then you make adjustments. Each outcome yields information, whether it's what you expected or not. And it's what you do with that information that makes the difference.
So if you say and that might be a kind of tricky, difficult question, but some wild guesses like top 3 or so. What would you, in your experience, which is a long time, what are the top 3 or whatever you want, top 2 things that you would just wish that you have a magic wand and you just change how police canine trainers work with the dogs?
Okay. That's a really good question. Magic wand questions are always cool. And this one's going to force me to think a little bit for the top 3, because I could probably give you a bunch. But the first one is I would have a magic wand to make every canine handler think they're not a canine handler, that they are a canine trainer. Because from the dog's perspective, you're either the trainer or the trainee, because anytime you're with your dog, one of you is training the other. And the dogs have it easier than we do. They don't have to think about anything except how do I make this hairless primate say good and give me stuff? Whereas we have to think about how do I get this dog to do what I need? How does this look in front of the boss? Am I going to get kicked out of the unit if I don't do this right? Will there, is the chief going to be in a good mood next week? Will my spouse be feeling frisky when I get home? Will there be peace in Ukraine? All these thoughts intrude on our presence with the dog. And we got to realize that when you're with your dog, learning is happening 24/7. Anytime you're with your dog, learning's happening. And if you don't take control of it, then it will take control of you and the dog will take control of you. So my first magic wand thing, I would get rid of the term canine handler in everybody's mind. And I would have them all believe 24/7, 365, they are canine trainers first. They don't rely on their trainer to come fix their problems for them. The trainer is a resource to help them come up with plans and ideas, but they take responsibility for execution. And they take responsibility for that dog and that dog's learning 24/7, 365.
Good one.
Okay, so that's my first magic wand.
Good one.
I think if you do that one, you don't need 2 more magic wands.
Yeah, they can fall in place from there on.
My second magic wand is that I would make every police manager and administrator supervisor, manager, and administrator realize that certification standards don't reflect operational proficiency. They are just a way to see if the dog has the basics. Operational proficiency is gained by doing what aligns with your department's tactics. And you should train for your tactics, train to tactics in such a way that you subsume the standards of certification. Don't train for the certification test. Train for this. This is one of the things people think a good IGP dog should make a good police dog. You can take a dog, and I would submit, I would rather have a solid IGP 1, maybe, basic B8, than a 3. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have that, because a dog that's a 3 is too deeply steeped in the patterns and the context that go with the sport. I'd rather have a dog that's a little greener, a little more well generalized for the dynamics of what we asked on the job. The genetics I want of the dog that can make it to 3 for sure. So the trick is picking a dog that's a 1 or on the way to a 1 that I look at him and say, that dog could be a 3. So going back to the question, most police administrators have no idea how much work it takes to maintain that dog, to get it to standards and operating performance. And so so as soon as I get handlers who take responsibility for thinking like trainers, I need administrators who will support them and give them the resources they need to do that. And then my third one is going to be a really good educational curriculum where handlers get the knowledge they need to be effective as trainers. And so for me, the answer, if you look at all three of that, the thing that it's training, training, training.
Yeah.
Handlers have to take responsibility for training. Administrators have to take responsibility for providing handlers access and the ability to train, not just once a week. Like, part of the problem is there are some places where a vendor will sell a dog to an agency, and then the vendor will provide a training package because the state mandates that they get 16 hours a month or whatever, right? So if you're a vendor and you have 200 dogs in your region that you have to provide training support, 16 hours of training support to every month, well, how are you going to do that? And the easiest way to log 16 hours is to take every unit. Let's say it's a unit that has 6 dogs. You take 3 of them, you're the A squad, 3 of them, you're the B squad. A squad, you show up at the local high school to meet with the vendor on the 1st and 3rd Saturday of the month. B squad, you show up in the 2nd and 4th Saturday of the month. That way you get your 16 hours of training. They get there, and those 3 handlers are accompanied by 17 to 30 or 40 other handlers. How much actual training are they going to get in an 8-hour day? And how effective is it going to be? How specifically tailored for where that dog is at is it going to be? And that's something that needs to get corrected in the industry. Police agencies need to not accept that as sufficient, and vendors need to realize maybe they aren't the best way to provide this, and the agencies need to step up and train a training cadre. I'm lucky. Washington State, we've had a state canine association since 1971 that certifies trainers and master trainers in specific disciplines. And you have to go through the process. You have to demonstrate that you have the ability to work at both ends of the leash, because you and I both know the dog's the easy part. The loop end of the leash is where all the work is. And you got to have somebody. And I know, because my first time I took the test, I didn't pass. Why? Because my answers were all dog specific. And they said, you need to address the loop end of the leash too. You're good at this end, but you need to address that. Come back in a year and try it again, or come back the next time we meet. I think it was 6 months. So I had 6 months to clean up my act and realized that I was missing the boat.
Really good. I asked the question, and of course it just came out of nowhere. So I had to write my answers. I'm like, oh, this is very interesting.
Yeah. All right. So what did you come up with?
Here is what I got. I mean, I think they're kind of within the same package. Like probably the very first thing that made a big impression on me when I was starting to train dogs. And he wasn't a big name trainer. It was just somebody that was kind of on my level probably, but was intellectually on a different level than where I was. And so my first one is I would force them to ask questions. I think when you're in the police, when you're in the army, when you have the rankings and the way the structure is, it almost has to they have to be challenged to, you have to ask questions. And if you start asking dumb questions, that's okay. Ask the dumbest question you can come up with, and then you're gonna refine your question, just how your training is gonna get refined. But sitting down and nodding and going, yes, sir, or whatever the format will be, and just doing what you're told without understanding, it's in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes in that community.
Recipes are a recipe for failure.
And normally when again, like I go and I do presentation and I listen, and always the presenter gives their lecture. It doesn't create that interactive relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And the last one that we both tried, but it was hard. It was like, hey, talk to me, anything, nothing, crickets. Just because they're not used to, and so anyway, this is a for sure a number one thing, because if you don't ask question, I don't know how much you get from what I'm teaching you. There is only assumptions made, or sometimes you're just not even present. You're not with me. We're both wasting each other's time. So,
one of my mentors, have you ever heard of Steve McKenzie?
I've heard the name, yes. Yeah.
All right. Brilliant guy, PhD, animal behaviorist, State University of New York at Cobleskill. He's the late Steve McKenzie. He's passed away. But he's the guy who taught me to be curious. And he modeled it for me. We're watching another trainer working with teams, and I'm watching him predict what this guy's going to do next. And he goes through it, and he's right, and he's right, and he's right. And then the guy does something different. And his first response wasn't to say he was wrong. His first response was, I wonder why he did that. And then he said, at some point, it must have worked for him. And when it worked for him, this is what happened. This is what happened. So he's likely to do this next. So once he got curious about why this guy was doing what he's doing, he was able to see where the contingencies for the trainer were, not for the dog, but for the trainer.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. We're talking the same.
Yeah, it is. But and I guess the point for me is that was the point at which I realized I can't stand it in judgment of anybody, whether I agree or disagree with their methods or not, because people behave in life consistent with the way the situation occurs to them. Now, that may or may not reflect reality. They may or may not reflect my understanding of reality or the way it occurs to me. But if you give everybody the benefit of the doubt that this is consistent with the way a situation occurs to them, that creates an opportunity for you to get curious. Okay, why would it occur to them this way? Why would they behave this way? And then you can do this. And when you look at your methods, at what you do, Why did it, I did this and I expected this outcome, but I got this one. And so rather than being torqued off because I didn't get the outcome I was looking for, I get, wow. Now, this happened. Somehow it happened because there were contingencies at play. And now I got reinforced and I'm going to see it again. Do I want to see it again? And if not, what am I going to do? If I am going to see it again, can I use it? Can I be an opportunist? And can I cheat and take this dog's behavioral momentum in that direction and arc it the way I want?
And that's all because of one simple why. Like this is
why? And it's the five W's and an H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Apply all the time in training too, and we can use those and ask, okay, because every single one of those has an element that is a piece of effective training. I mean, if you think about it, who, all right, the roles of the dog and the trainer and anybody else, the helpers involved. What are we trying to accomplish? What did the dog do? What didn't they do? How did they do it? Where did this happen? When? How long did it take? Was the timing right? I mean, you could sit there and just four W's and an H all the way through this: who, what, where, when, why, and how, on almost any training situation, and get a better understanding of how to proceed moving forward than you had before you got in there, rather than making assumptions about what happened.
Yeah. So that's a big one for me. Another one would be, I would encourage them to focus on themselves and the dogs. So not to be, okay, this is all of us and we are all moving in the same, just as you said, like this group, like let's say the very kind of old school obedience classes, everybody makes a left turn now. And half of the dogs are, what are we doing here? But we are all making a left turn now. And so I think the individuality, and this is not an easy piece to work, but it's an important, I find it super important to be able to focus on you and your dog, and don't even compare where the others are going and how far behind or ahead of you are. Like just be with the instructor and your dog and go with the pace that you need to go, which goes to the next thing that I would spend a great deal of time to teach them two things: concepts and criteria. Too low criteria, you reach boredom, no learning is encouraged. Too high criteria, the same outcome. Understanding how to build criteria and how to raise it and when to come back and how far to come back. This is a mastery, but it's not difficult when you understand that this is a extremely important piece of the puzzle. And if you don't master that, no matter what else you put in the puzzle, that's a huge hole that will hunt you down for as many dogs as you have in the training.
For years, I've said, because people will say timing is the hallmark of a good trainer. Timing, hallmark of a good trainer. And I say, yeah, but criterion shift is the hallmark of a great trainer.
Yeah, criteria beats timing any time.
In the grand scheme of things, and you see the really, really good trainers are the ones who are so good, they know when they can break the rules. They know when they can go a little faster than they normally might otherwise, or somebody else might otherwise. My wife is one of those. I'm not as fluent as she is, and in sync with dogs as she can. She walks into a room and all the dogs kind of go, and she says that's projection on my part, but I've seen it. I watch, and I watch her go way faster with things than I could, because she has got such an exquisite sense of criterion shift. Me, I'm teaching a bunch of cops. So rather than having everybody take left turn at the same time, I've individualized it, but I've individualized in such a way that I give them a structure to go, and I stick with that structure. And it's kind of been ingrained in me that way. So I probably go a little slower than I could or should sometimes. So I'll own that. I'll own that as, if I were in your shoes, had I been a competitor, I probably would have developed a different mindset about that. But because I'm taking people who know nothing, and I got 16 weeks to turn them into canine handlers, I build
that's very challenging.
Yeah, and I build an 80-20 rule that basically says when you're 80% successful, you can make one criterion shift of at least 20%. And where Jen's really good compared to me is she can manage multiple criterion shift at one time and not lose track of what she's done. I can't pull that off as well as she can, and maybe that's because women are better at the kind of rapid task switching that takes, that multitasking that people would describe. But I will freely admit that I'm second rate compared to her at this. And she's retired from the business. She doesn't do any animal behavior consultation anymore. So.
Yeah, when we talk about criteria, also, of course, naturally you would go too high, or you would stay too low, and you hopefully recognize it and you modify. So part of understanding criteria, a huge part of understanding criteria, is to know when and how to reset, so the dog actually sees it as such. Meaning, you go too far, the dog's getting lost, before it gets frustrated or bummed out or whatever, you reset it to the point that they're like back into known waters, comfortable and confident, and see how you can present the topic in a different way. So that's another one. And concept, for me, concept is pretty much all. Like anything that I do, it's about concepts, and mostly, you go to when I go to police workshops, there's like the common problems that everybody has.
My dog won't out.
My dog won't out. My dog wouldn't shut up. My dog will not call off, and then the rest. But like if you solve one of those properly, then it starts to generalize how we function. And what they like, let's stay with my dog wouldn't out. Everybody expects that, okay, we have this dog that just bites, and the handler comes and the dog rolls his eyes and starts to flip, and we know the picture. And it's like, how do we fix that? And we don't fix that right there and then. We need to go back and teach the dog what out means, what pros and cons are, in a level where the dog is open to learning, instead of I'm just gonna fight my way through.
Right.
But that's the expectation that, and this is why I'm saying that in the, and not just in police world, but in a lot of dog training, whenever there is a problem, and of course, I'm sure for you it's the same, but whenever I get invited, yes, sometimes I get invited to present how I teach and how I do, but a lot, at least half of the workshop or seminar or whatever, it's a problem-solving situations.
Right.
People don't like to be taken further back. They're having the question for this moment, not understanding that this is we can patch it, but you will continue to have the problem.
I've watched you do that. Olympia seminar put on by the Schutzen Club in Olympia, Washington, back 15 years ago.
Yeah, see, you
Probably.
remember that's your brain, how it works, see?
Yeah, and Les Flores' crowd. And you actually said it. You actually, first half of this, so it was 2 days, Saturday, Sunday. First half, Saturday morning, you were assessing the dogs. You were baselining. You were trying to figure out where they were all at. We had a lunch break, and you came back, and you were honest. You said, I wouldn't do some of these things if this was just my dog and we had all the time in the world, but this is the weekend and you're expecting to see some things. So here we go. And, and almost everything you're addressing was, you're addressing the symptom, not the problem.
Right.
And the symptom, what they consider the symptom to be the problem, and actually no, it is just a symptom of a foundational weakness. That if you go back and you rebuild the foundation, it's there. And by the way, it's far easier to build the foundation right from the beginning when you're building your house than to go back underneath a house that's already built and then try and fix that foundation. So, training dogs and building houses are the same thing. Everything depends upon the foundation. And the example for me that particular weekend was one dog that you had sold one of the guys, a young, kind of youngest, maybe late 20s, early 30s, white male dude, but it was one of your pups that he had. And you hadn't seen that dog in like 9 months or a year. I can't remember. It was some time. And you started doing the game with that dog. And that dog, like, immediately, like the handler had struggles with maintaining connection. And as soon as you broke it out, the dog remembered, oh yeah, you know how to play the game. All right, I'm ready to go. Your foundation was established. Right. And that dog, made rapid progress. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to realize, that particularly because I think we both realize that play is the foundation of our approaches, is that there's so much you can do with the foundation, with play, that you miss out with food. Now, food is good when I want a dog to have a calm focus, like when I'm doing tracking and I want a dog to be calm at the articles. I'll pay with food there because I don't get them as aroused. But for almost all my other stuff, for the vast majority of our work, I actually want the dog to be able to spin up and then spin itself back down, spin itself up, spin itself back down. The ability to recover from over arousal is important for me.
Yeah.
For what we do, because, unlike, the advocates for DS and CC for a lot of things, we're not trying to keep our dogs below threshold. By definition, they're going to get into situations, they're going to push them into a true, genuine fight or flight situation. And they've got to have some kind of recovery skills. And the only way you can do that is get them up there, teach them that it's not the end of the world and that they can come back. Let them bring them. And once you talk about concepts, there's probably no more powerful concept to teach a dog than it can bring itself back from its own over arousal.
Right.
Your conversation with Stuart Hilliard, about the difference between the healing exercise in Schutzen at that time, IGP, and French ring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his wanting to go in there and show these guys how to get a lively heel. And they're going like, why would we want to do that? Our dogs are going to be out there, burn themselves out for 45 minutes. In the man work phase, I want them to conserve energy. I don't need that. I want a heel that just gets me by, gets us going. They're calm and relaxed, and we go from there. So their operating paradigm dictated what they need in that animal, and that is that ability to just spin up and spin down, spin up and spin down. That's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know my position on play, obviously. It's out. I think it's everything.
I hadn't seen that until you did that. I didn't know what you're wearing. That's cool.
I think it's just like if I see somebody playing with their dog, and I mean playing, able to take the dog up there, control it, bring it back, and play with that drive and emotional state with clarity, I think the rest is it's just teaching behaviors from there on.
Yeah.
But you are already teaching how to guide, how to cooperate, and how to control through play, nothing else. Just an innocent you with a ball on a rope or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's one of my, it's always been since even way before we made the videos, the game and all that. Somehow, I have no idea how I got fixated on it, but it never went away, and it actually,
the dogs
I
reinforced
refined
you.
it. They did. Yeah, I think they did.
The dogs reinforced you.
Yeah,
Dude.
I'm definitely reaping the fruits from it, and luckily I acknowledged it, and play. I think it's just the number one thing.
You spend so much time. We talk about like the operant conditioning paradigm, and we talk about the quadrants. And I think the quadrants as a concept has gotten us in trouble as dog trainers. And I went to the AMATA conference this year, the International Marine Animal Trainers Association, and AZA. It was a combined conference between the two of them. And I can't remember who the speaker was, but he had a beautiful way to describe operant conditioning as opposed to being quadrants. It's 2 procedures and 4 consequences. 2 procedures, 4 consequences. It's either reinforcement or punishment, and the consequences are additive or subtractive.
Yeah.
And you look at this, and I go, wow. And so, like, I think about it, because for years, like if I threw my screen up on your screen right now, and since we're doing this as a podcast, I'll have to describe it. So I have an operant conditioning continuum that I show people to teach them about this, and I do this. But the very next slide I have is one where they're not 4 equal quadrants. I look at it, and I have one box, and I got a giant green R+ box that occupies easily 80% of the space in the image. P- winds up occupying a smaller space like that, maybe not even 5%. R- even smaller positive punishment before that. And you got to realize if you're going to use negative reinforcement, you have to apply positive punishment first. So they kind of blend together. You can't, as a training procedure. Now, in the natural world, I understand that it's not a contingent aversive that gets applied, but as a training procedure for negative reinforcement, you have to apply the aversive. It is DPO. It's differential punishment of other. Anything other than the behavior you want is going to get the aversive applied. So I look at this and I say, this is the way I try to live my life with my dogs. And this diagram is probably not as much in the green as I like it is. The other parts are so much smaller than that. Mm-hmm. Way more time spent with that. And I think when you realize it, when you're not thinking of it in terms of quadrants, like a window with 4 equal panes, you start realizing, oh, yeah, and these other things are there, but this is where I spend my life. This is where I live with my dog, so that when I do these other things, they're not there. They're there. They exist. But I have a big enough bank account. I mean, I tell the story of my youngest daughter from my first marriage, when she got her first checking account. She thought she was hot stuff and everything like that. She got this checking account, and she decided to take her friends to lunch at Subway. And then she was going to write a check, and she wrote a check for lunch on her way out, and everything is fine. But a few days later, she gets a letter in the mail from the bank saying, hey, your check bounced. So you got to go pay that person Oh, and by the way, we're charging you $35. She goes to Subway and she finds that they're going to charge her $50. So she had to pay $85 extra on top of the like $18 she paid at that time for a Subway meal for she and her friend or friends. And so the costs are a lot higher when you don't have much money in the bank. But if she had, instead of having $16 in the bank, instead of that, if she'd had 1,600, would she have felt any of that pain? No, you don't think about it. And so our job is to build a trust account with our dogs so that when those things happen naturally, or whether it's by a procedure where we're making a withdrawal, it isn't as painful. You don't notice it. Like if I came to you, remember you in your poorest days, all right? The days in your life in which you struggle the most, right? And I came to you and think of where it was. And I said, Ivan, I need $100. And you'd have to go, I don't know if I have it. I don't know. And if I did, man, that's going to put me in, since I've been in that place in my life, right? Now, with where you're at, if I came to you and said, Ivan or Ivan, I need $100, you probably wouldn't have to think about it at all. You say, I got an account that can handle that. Boom, here you go. We're good to go. I trust you. You'll get it back to me. We're good to go. We have a trust account established like that. You have a big enough bank account that isn't going to hurt you. Even if I didn't pay it back up, you're still going to be able to feed your family. You're still going to be able to, put gas in your car.
Yep.
And that stuff's still there. So we have to realize our job as trainers is to build that trust account up at all the time. And that when we make a withdrawal, or when a withdrawal happens outside our control, that we as quickly as possible replenish it, get back on that proper pathway so that that trust account can be built up.
I love listening to you right now. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I have so many questions, and I'm probably just bouncing up and down, trying to keep some order, but I know I'm gonna fail eventually.
Okay.
So we will be bouncing. I want to hit a little bit about tracking. I always been curious. I don't know, like when I started, this was early 90s, San Francisco. Park police and their normal police department, but mainly the park police in San Francisco. And this was my very first time where I had to do something that I have not done before, and that was hard surface tracking. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're talking early 90s, so it's a different world, how you come up with what you do and the information you're gathering, and a lot goes by trial and error, which I still believe that it's a very important way to learn, but it was very pronounced in my upbringing. And I know, and I don't know, like I've heard it back and forth from many different places, but the idea with the soaked T-shirt and the water, this is how I taught them. But all I knew was that somebody somewhere, I heard that, and it just made a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. From there on, I was already doing tracking. I very passionate about all dog training, and tracking for sure has a special place for me. From what I knew, did you come up with that idea, or was it somewhere else?
I didn't come up with it. I'll tell you the story. So I was teaching with Bob Eden at the International Canine Academy conferences. This was one in Reno back in 1996. Not Reno, but Las Vegas, 1996. One of the instructors there was Jeff Fenton, who was the trainer at that time for the Phoenix Police Canine Unit. And Jeff Fenton, in the seminar after the seminar, because there's the seminar, and then when the trainers and everybody get together, then the real learning happens. Mm-hmm. And Jeff was talking about what he was doing to teach dogs to track in Phoenix, Arizona. which is a brutal tracking climate.
Yeah.
And he said that he ran into a trainer from Sweden who said that that's what they did. They made scent in a bottle. They took sweat from a dirty T-shirt, put it in the water,
Yeah.
sprayed
Spray
it down,
bottle. Yeah.
and then have the dogs follow it. And that was all I knew. And so I give full credit to having, I may be the one that popularized it, that put it out on the internet at the time. Like right then and there, I put it out, but there are other people that were had to be talking about it for Jeff to have found it. But he said he got it from a Swedish guy who they attended the same event together at some point. He's never been able to find that Swedish guy. Nobody knows. But every time I talk about it, I say, whoever you are that told that to Jeff Fenton, get a hold of me. I want to give you a bunch of thanks. I no longer use that method per se, but it's what gave me the start for the progression that I have now, which is very akin to if you took scent in a bottle and it had a baby with Godfrey Dildai's approach, where he puts a treat in the heel of every footstep in bare dirt. All right. So this is like the love child of those two things, but on asphalt. And that's our HIT tracking system, hydration intensified tracking training right now.
What about, is there a possibility that also comes somehow from the AKC community? Because that was another, when we were playing around with it, it was either your name would come up or not really a name, but people would say, well, that's what we do in AKC. But I did not know much.
There were some people that were that I don't know whether they knew it beforehand or not, but they republished what I wrote.
Okay.
So I don't know. And mine was just a summary on this. And like I say, I can't take credit for inventing it. I wish I knew the guy the man or woman that did. Whoever that person is, I owe a debt to. I'm thankful for, because they propelled me in a direction that actually helped us get way more success in an urban environment than we'd had. I mean, we were starting to struggle in the late 80s, early 90s with the urbanization in Seattle. Right. It was getting to be a more urban city, and we had less rural residential, or not rural, but suburban residential tracking to do. And we had to come up with something. And our grass foundations were hurting us because of the law of primacy. It just, training on grass under beautiful, pristine conditions at night, and then expecting the dogs to perform, in the day in the city was tough, or even at the night in the city was tough. And so this wound up working to our benefit. And we started out with scent in a bottle, but after doing it with a bunch of dogs in workshops, we found that water, just unchlorinated water, either distilled water or well water, worked just as well as scent in a bottle. You didn't need to add the scent. So that's why we stopped adding the scent. It wound up being enough to increase the salience to give the dogs the edge. That it worked well. And it was one less thing that you had to fade.
Yeah. And that's always a good thing. if you can.
Well, one less thing to fade. And fading is nothing but reverse shaping, if you think about it. So.
Yeah, the way I do now is also, I ended up basically came up with making a circle track. I don't know if you have ever heard me talk about it or no, but basically it's a circle track.
Mike Breton told me about your circle tracks.
Yeah, to where there is no end. So you're not really, at least when you're learning to track, you focus on doing the track and not finishing anything. And what was really after a few of them, I realized that this is the moment when the dog can really see.
It's about the behavior.
And learn that humans can walk on different places instead of staying on this one thing and then deciding, humans don't walk there. When the dog is literally in the very beginning, and gets exposed to the grass, the gravel, the dirt, the whatever is available, I would pick specifically.
Exactly what we do with the circle track.
Yeah.
Exactly what we do. In fact, I did an article for Police Canine Magazine about urban tracking. And that was the first place where we published about the circle track. And Michael Breton, I don't know if you remember Michael Breton.
Yeah.
Michael is the guy that told me about it. At the time he was doing it up, in his area near North Bend. And I immediately saw the brilliance of teaching the dogs two things. One is track for the track's sake instead of about the end, being about something at the end. And B, the ability to teach surface transitions way earlier in the process than I used to. When I first started and when I did, we would spend weeks on one surface before transitioning to another, and then weeks to another, and then weeks to another. And then we would put the whole package together and do multiple surfaces on one track. With the circle tracks, once the dog understood the paradigm of the circle track, we could introduce, I like draw track maps. I have an application on my phone for every track that we ever ran in the city. I could go back, I could find them, and I could map them. So I got the GPS coordinates for all these tracks that run through the city. And I got some where it's just a circle on a parking lot at a park or at a stadium where I've got grass, I've got gravel, I've got concrete, I've got asphalt. I've got all the major, and I've got some dirt. I've got all the 5 major surfaces I need.
Yep.
All in one spot. And I can get the dog comfortable in all of them. And it's like, oh, and to have a dog that can relax enough that it can walk that track and have the track layer walking around behind him, backfilling, and then just keep going in a circle, keep going. Everybody says, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to be teaching them to find a bad guy? Yeah, we can back chain that. We can chain that piece together later on.
Fast.
Yeah. And that, rather than have that being the focus right now and the dog's thinking about the ends so much they forget about the means, that was our problem. Our systems used to be built around runaway tracks.
What
Everybody
tracks?
does runaway.
Our runaway tracks.
Yeah. And guess what? That means from the beginning, the dog is thinking about the ends and not the means.
Yeah.
Circle tracks, I owe Michael Breton, because he got it from you. I owe them for the idea about letting the dog really learn to track for tracking's sake. And then you put the man at the end, and then, or the evidence article at the end, and it becomes really easy.
It very quickly makes the dog search. It's basically generalization discrimination from the very first track. And it's like, what is the consistent part? Mm-hmm. And the only consistent part is whatever you're dropping, whatever that scent is, but this is the only consistent piece.
Right. And it's an easy
place.
I
didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, I'm grateful for finding out about your approach to circle tracks from Michael Breton.
It's very interesting. I mean, that's how we all did. As I said, that's, when I was playing with the first time with hard surface, it was all in my head. It was all Steve White, and I wish there was a way to contact Steve White then, but early 90s, there is no, I don't know. It was a very different time.
The dog training community right now is as polarized as it is. Within the circles, people are familiar with, like you and I am familiar with you. I'm acquainted with you from having both of us teaching at the same conferences here and there, right, and having been to one of your weekend workshops years ago. And people may be acquainted with me here and there, but that's how we cross-pollinate.
Right. Cross-pollinate. That's nice.
This cross-pollination is useful because it makes for a more robust organism. And And we need to do this. We need to be able to have conversations with people who don't train the way we do.
Yeah.
Because the situation occurs to them, they will behave consistent with the way the situation occurs to them. And I want to know more about that. And, we find these things and we try them, and it doesn't always work that well. I've got to admit, I was working with a group that wanted to do tracking in the desert, in the desert area. And, we were working remotely, and I'd come see them every few months. And unfortunately, it didn't work out as well, largely because even though I thought I was clear about how to proceed with criteria shift and move yourself out, people spent too much time with the spray, and then the dogs, developed a dependency on it. And that's one of the things you have to realize. The more time you spend in one spot, the more likely you are to create a plateau. And it's hard. And
Talking about criteria again, right?
Yeah. I didn't realize it until I took their data that they had in Excel spreadsheets, and I combined it all together, and then I could see where the gaps were. And I could see what happens, that the ones who did well and performed well, their curve was most like what I saw from my own handlers, where I could be there and supervise them more often. So I now know, doing something moving forward in the future, I've got to have closer supervision about this piece of it. I can help them out. So this is one of those things that goes back to, like you say, the criterion shift being important, but also about every outcome yields information. Although this didn't work the way I wanted it to, as well as I wanted it to, it worked well enough that I know that they can do it. And it worked well enough that I know that adjustments can be made, and it could be even better. And I think that's one of the things we have to realize, that we get wrapped up and get ourselves all butthurt because of failure. And in the training context, that's never the dog's fault. The dog can only perform to the level trained. You can call a dog stubborn, you can do anything you want, but at the end of the day, it still falls on our shoulders to say, okay, I just got information about how I need to adjust for the next time, rather than just packing up my tent and walking away and giving up. We can sit there and say, what's going to happen? Look, I've had dogs that, didn't perform as well on the street as a police dog as we wanted. And if we just abandoned that good animal and that good officer and didn't make adjustments, we'd have to start from scratch all over again. So our life with dogs is always about taking the information the outcomes give us and making adjustments. Always adjusting.
I want to ask you this one, because and it's not only you, it's a common saying that I'm gonna paraphrase what it's like it's always, it's not really the dog, but it's you adapting to and understanding where you need to reinforce or what you need to do to take care, but it's not necessarily a dog doing it incorrectly because the dog wants to do it incorrectly, kind of thing. I know I'm butchering what you just said, but I believe that dogs also sometimes are just dogs, and they do know what is expected, just like people and any being. But they're like, well, what if? I think not always comes down to incorrect training. What I'm saying is sometimes the dog is at fault, and it's not at fault in that sense. I'm not saying it even correctly, but the dog is consciously deciding to go off rail to do something else, not because of anything else, but because it chooses to.
Okay, let's take a look at that. I think that's a great observation. In that moment, that dog chooses a different path to a different sort of reinforcement than the one that you set for it and you expected it to perform, right? And if that's the case, that dog is doing that, then somehow in that dog's repertoire, that other thing that attracts it was more attractive than what you had to offer at that moment. All right. And I'm saying, don't say anything other than that moment. Is now you have information about moving forward. I need to train this more. I need to train so that the dog is resistant to that other attractive thing and stays on our path more. That's all I'm saying. Don't make a value judgment. Don't kick yourself in the tail saying you're a failed trainer. Just take the information. That dog did this when I thought it was going to do this, when I needed to do this. So I need to go ahead, expose it to that other thing in such a way that it sees that this path is more beneficial, more reinforcing.
100%.
If you want to take the ethological approach, it has more benefits and fewer costs. And if you want to take the behaviorist approach, it's more reinforcing. And that's what I'm saying. The dog, in the moment that it does that, is telling you, this is what I'm prepared to deliver. Now, you may have come into it. And I've been there. I've been there. I've trained people to be there. And all of a sudden they've been there like, this didn't work out the way we thought it was going to. And at that point, all we can do is say, we didn't anticipate this distraction having this impact. That's a training gap that we get to go and have some fun filling. I mean, think about it too. You and I both operate in paradigms which have consequences. You know, you're going to miss the podium if you're not performing at all cylinders, and we're going to miss the bad guy if we're not operating in all cylinders. So it behooves us. We have this external thing. But think about it. From a dog's perspective, do they give a rip about trophies?
No.
Do they give a rip about putting somebody in jail, a booking slip? No, they don't. They don't care about that at all. That's us, all us. We got to own that piece. If we could set it up so their training days were every bit as fun as the competition days, the dogs would always choose the training day every day. They would live for that moment, right? And in fact, most of the people whose performance is like they're great in training, but they struggle in the competition, ring nerves, that's a human quality. Right. We change our behavior, or we didn't adequately prepare them for the leanness of the schedule that we're facing. Same thing with operations on the street. We run into the same problems running in there. All of a sudden, you know what? If you didn't prepare your dog for a dynamic arrest scenario in which officers are yelling at somebody, you got a bunch of, so here's a handler and a dog. And we just had an incident in Circleville, Ohio, where a police canine handler deployed his dog on somebody after the state troopers had chased him. And it's all over the news. You can Circleville canine, you'll see it there. And this is a case in which that handler and that dog were so focused in on what this person was doing in such a way that they weren't fully aware of what the troopers who were in charge of this case were trying to say and do. So that's an operational error. And that's one of those things where you should be able to take that information and make adjustments and realize, okay, I got to prepare myself and my dog for being able to operate in a situation where the most of the noise that's being created is by cops who are yelling.
Right.
And the suspect is just going, okay, yeah, what I give, like that. So you think about it, and you have to prepare yourself instead of having you as a competitor, and competitors in general have to prepare their dogs for leaner reinforcement schedules than they may give their dogs on the training field. They may be more liberal with their reinforcement, but you don't get to do that on the training field. And so you have to overtrain. You have to train the dog to withstand a leaner schedule in training so that when you get to the field, it's a walk in the park. It's just a day. And that dog has to learn about delayed gratification, that actually going through this long thing really pays well, that we're going to have fun. This is like, it's still going to be cool stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think it might be just playing with words and some semantics in some way. it just always when somebody says it's not the dog's fault, it's just you like it comes back at the handler or the trainer, and
Yeah, don't talk about fault. I agree with you. We shouldn't talk about fault. It's just that it is just a blanket statement that if dogs don't perform as we expect, it's because we asked them to perform something that they weren't yet prepared to deliver.
okay, yeah, here we go. Or they're prepared and they're very fluent in it, but there are times that they still may choose. It could be just a completely call of nature. There is a female in heat all of a sudden, or I've never
Didn't prepare for a female in heat.
I've never chased a squirrel in my life, but right now it triggered me and I'm after it and I don't even know why. And I am 100% with you. We have to train it and we have to prepare it. If we don't, then we fail.
Right.
But we shouldn't blame our training because the genetics kick in, so to speak, at one moment.
Did you say the word blame anywhere? Oh, no, genetics are a part. Genetics, hey, dude. I mean, Marion and Keller Breland wrote the misbehavior of organisms as a response to the behavior of organisms because of instinctive drift.
Right.
Right?
Right.
We all acknowledge that that's a piece of that's a piece of the equation. So I'm perfectly comfortable with saying that. I'm just saying, instead, blame is a useless tool. Blaming the dog or blaming the handler is a useless tool.
I agree. Yeah. So,
okay.
But this is
so. Ask yourself the question: who is best prepared to make the adjustments to address that situation in the future? The dog or the person?
100% the person.
Okay, so it's just about who takes responsibility for it moving forward. Forget about blame. Forget about shame. Forget about anything except how are we going to adjust and move forward?
Exactly. As long as we don't put it, because it's a like there is that notion to say, well, even there are T-shirts, just as bumper stickers, as you say, the dog is always right, or whatever. Like it's not. What I'm saying is, it's not always that the training has failed. Sometimes the dog, purposefully or not purposefully, consciously or subconsciously, decides or doesn't decide to do something else. And at that moment, as you say, it's not correct to blame either one. But we tend to blame the handler. It's like, well, you didn't. It's like, maybe, but maybe I did. And sometimes...
No, you just take responsibility for what's going to happen moving forward.
Right.
It's information. It happened. You can't change it. And trying to beat yourself. And see, this is the hardest part. I say this. You ask my wife. She will tell you, if I make a mistake, I'm hard on myself. Harder than I should be. So I get where you're at and how useless that is. So I'm 100% about, you don't want to blame handlers for this. At the same time, somebody's got to take responsibility for what's going to happen moving forward. And if this is something that you may run into later on, the human being is the one that's equipped to do it.
100%. Yeah.
You don't, yeah.
Good. I like it.
No blame, no nothing. You just put so like I have an article. You go to my website there, or I don't think I have it posted there. I'll post it. There's a division of labor. So I set up an exercise at one of the International Police Canine Conferences. I had the building searches one night. Had this giant warehouse. And it had a mezzanine level around three sides of it. So there was along the outside edge, there was about a 20-foot space. And this thing was about 150 feet long and maybe 75 feet wide. And about 20 feet of it had a second level, like there were offices underneath. And so they had storage up there. So this is in Las Vegas in the summer, in the evening. I hid somebody up in the southwest corner of the mezzanine. entrance for the handlers they would come in through a door on the east side, about 2/3 of the way up towards the north end of the building. What do you think 45 out of 47 dogs over the course of 3 nights did when they went through that door? Did they go to where that guy was in the southeast corner? No.
Right, they should.
45 out of 47 dogs went to the northeast corner, diagonally opposite, which is probably 165, 170 feet away from where that person was, and started climbing the wall going up in that northeast corner.
Yeah.
Why?
Current, right?
Air current, because the southwest corner is the hottest corner. At the end of the day, the west side gets the sun. The east side has already been cooling down. The south side, because we're north of the equator, gets oblique sun all day long. The north side only gets indirect sunlight. So the northeast corner is the coolest one. Hot air rises where that person's hidden, flows along the ceiling, travels 170 feet or however many feet to the other end of the building, drops down, and all those dogs are climbing up there. To make matters worse, there was a big giant metal embossing machine in the middle of this place. And so as the backup officer, I tell the handlers when the dogs are climbing up there, "Oh God, what you guys got? You guys got somebody up there?" Because there's a mezzanine right up there. And they all go, "I don't know, let's call them out." So they get behind this embossing machine with their back to where the decoy was. And then they would say, "You up in the corner, come out now." So the handler or the decoy had been instructed, if they challenge you, stand up and announce your presence. This guy would get up from behind them and say, "Okay, I'm here, I give up." And these guys would get mad at their dogs. "What is wrong with my dog? Why is he doing that? Is there another guy up there?" And they were on. And I said, "No, there's a division of labor. Your dog's job is to tell you where the strongest concentration of scent available to it is. And then your job is to determine how that scent is getting from the source or is at source to where your dog can get it. And then together you can fade this." So in other words, now you should be able to assess that if your dog's indicating high, you may have 2 danger zones, one right there where the dog is and another one behind you. And you should behave accordingly. Have your backup officers say, "Hey, we got a risk spot here. I'm going to challenge him. You watch that way." But the whole point of this exercise was to emphasize that there is a division of labor. Who can make the decisions about it? The dog is going to follow its nose.
Yep.
Now, why did 2 of those dogs get it right? 2 of those dogs right, one each on 2 separate nights, the third or the second and third nights, and they were the last dogs. So by what happened was, by the time midnight rolled around, the temperature had cooled down, the differential wasn't so profound, and there was a lot more of the drift of that person's scent dropping down there where those dogs could get it. And you have to realize scent conditions change. Again, your job. You have a division of labor. Dog tells you where scent is. Your job is to figure out how it got there or whether that's where the bad guy is. And either way, figure out tactics going to help you solve the problem. So
Division
the same thing
of labor,
happens.
I like it.
Same thing happens when you're doing your training on the field and you have that unexpected squirrel that pops out that he's never chased before. Well, we know about trigger stacking, right? That you can take an arousing stimulus and expose the dog to it. And they get a level of arousal. And then you can expose another one and they get another level of arousal, and a different one, they get another arousal. But if you expose them one and then you add the other and then the other, now their level of arousal is up and they become hard to control. We call it in the civilian realm, we call it the birthday party effect. The dog, you can teach it to handle a bouncing ball around it, and you can teach it to handle screams and yells, and you could teach it to handle things running by. But all of a sudden, you have a birthday party full of kids with balloons that look like balls running and screaming by the dog, and that dog goes after one of them and does the healing thing that it should, like it was chasing a sheep. That's because the accumulation of arousal, Panksepp's right. Jaak Panksepp is right. that seeking circuit's pretty powerful. And all of a sudden you put all this stuff and this opportunity to chase gets in there. Woo! And so you're in competition, you've trained your dog and all this stuff, and you're in a different city now. You go to a different part of the country, and all of a sudden your dog is used to these little brown chipmunks that are this big, and all of a sudden you go to the Southeast and now you got these big black squirrels like this.
Right.
The kind of squirrels that people there want and eat. Okay. I mean, and your dog goes, oh, new game. I've never seen one of these before. I'm going to go after that. And the dog chases. It's not that he's stubborn. It's that he just wasn't ready for that. He didn't realize that thing existed. Okay. Yeah. New information. We train.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. I like it. So let's touch on, let's go a little bit back and forth with, I feel like I can talk to you more about the force-free side of things. Simply because when I try to talk to some of the people that are advocates of force-free or against aversive, I find that a lot of times they're not quite familiar. Like sometimes somebody will say, well, I am, how did it go? What's the word? Like I've transitioned, but it's not that word, but I was one of those trainers back then 30 years ago.
It was a crossover.
Crossover.
I'm one.
And it always goes to, well, I was a crossover 30 years ago. But 30 years ago, what was happening and what happens today is quite different. And I'm not saying that it's all rainbows and unicorns. There is horrible training here and there. But there is some mastery that, as you were saying at that one workshop where you went, that you couldn't really tell which dog was trained how. But I find that a lot of the force-free, like the big advocates, they don't seem to even have interest to explore, just for the sake of pure knowledge, what goes on when it's done right. It just kind of rejected at the moment that, okay, well, there is some form of aversive. And so it's a little bit difficult conversation to have since, like, let me see, where do I go? Let's say one of them is how when somebody says, well, that's a quick fix, and it immediately implies that this is just done for that moment and it's not going to carry over and it's not going to last simply because it's a quick fix and maybe some suppression or some form of aversive was used. What is your, how do you feel about the whole quick fix thing? Because like for me, quick fix is, I'm always looking, like if I can fix it is kind of weird, but if I can bring clarity to a situation quicker and it lasts, I am always about a quick fix. And I don't look at it as something that I shouldn't even look forward to accomplish that way.
So let's take a look at the criteria you just laid out. If you can solve something quickly and it lasts. So those are the two criteria that you need. Because if it doesn't last, then you haven't solved it. You've just given yourself a temporary respite. And I don't. So this, I'm going to give you the same description of this that I gave to Nick Benger a couple of weeks ago about my stance on use of aversives, which is basically the same as Bob Bailey's. I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Bailey.
Yeah,
Bob Bailey is, he's the guy that was one of the pioneers of the Navy's dolphin training programs, and worked with Marion and Keller Breland and Animal Behavior Enterprises. And he's been doing chicken workshops for a long time, really helping people build great mechanical skills. So
yeah, I think he's doing a lot of things now in Europe, mostly
he's done some really good things with some people who are doing some pretty high level stuff in there. And Bob will tell you that he doesn't teach with aversives. I don't teach with aversives. Okay. I prefer the learning occur with positive reinforcement, and I will try to arrange things in such a way that I can do that. But Bob will also tell you that there are sometimes when you don't have control over the contingencies, that the application of aversive can interrupt the problematic behavior in such a way that you have an opportunity to redirect the dog onto the path of positive reinforcement, and that you can then avoid it moving forward. And he says it's doubtful. He said, ideally, if you can do it in one time, that's great. But the reality is it's probably going to take a few of them. But if you get a few times where the dog understands this just isn't going to pay, but this is going to pay, they'll start making the right decisions. And that's the extent to which I would use an aversive. And it's rare when I do it. And, you probably could find it out there. There's a video where I talk about my rules for using punishment.
Yeah, I actually want to go to that too.
Yeah. And there's 9 of them, not 8 now. It was originally 8. And so that's what you see on the video, but it's all the 8 that you saw, but one more. And that is, you should never forget that punishment reinforces the individual doing the punishing. In other words, because it makes the annoying thing go away, you get relief from it. Maybe temporary, but there is a sense, there is a potential. And in your own podcast, you've described that that's one of the problems with some of the low-level approaches and some of the other things too, is it can tend to create the situation where you're more likely to push the button because you've had that momentary relief from the thing that annoyed you before.
No. I just clarify that. My argument with that low stim conditioning is not that, but it's actually their belief that they prepare, so to speak, the dog, so therefore they can use it freely, and the dog is not being suppressed, but actually it grows and gets better and better with the more use. That's my argument.
I understand that, and I think that's because if you look at if you look at the rules, it's going to be number 4. It must be a perfect intensity. If it's too much, you're going to get generalized suppression. And if it's not enough, the animal's just going to develop a punishment callus. They'll become inured to the punishment. You're going to have to start either doing it more often or raising up the intensity. Mm-hmm. So that's a reality. These are the rules. My rules are set there so that when I do decide I'm going to use an aversive, I try to comply with them as best I possibly can to help me. So I plan it the way I plan my training. You are a fluid trainer that comes out and moves things dynamically, intuitively. I'm probably a little more structured, maybe because the audience I've been teaching to for the years, but one way or the other, that's what works for me. Mm-hmm. And I'll say that most of the time when I'm planning on using an aversive, going through this process of assessing it through the rules and coming up with a plan, I realized I missed a contingency arrangement that I could have, an antecedent arrangement that I could set up that might give me a path there without having to use aversive. So a lot of times I literally talk myself out of it. Don't need to do it, and I get performance. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. So your number 9 rule, the new one, mm-hmm. which I'm surprised that it's a new one because it's a very well known I mean, it comes from way back from Skinner, and then of course,
I
of
I
course,
assumed everybody
Carson, and
realized
it's fell out with Zidman, where he writes a whole book on this, and he basically says that yes, if you punish, you look forward to doing it again because it's reinforcing you to do that.
I don't know if you look forward to it, but you're more likely to because it becomes easier.
But why? I think this is misleading, and I will see if I can.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah, I'll do my best here. To punish when there is no need for punishment, where would that take us? Like, would you stop somebody and give them a ticket just because? Assuming that you've given 20 tickets today for people really screwing up, and actually giving a lot of warnings, and actually even sometimes just letting them go, how giving a ticket reinforces you to do more or to enjoy it more. I guess there is that kind of person that can do that, but that's based on the personality, not necessarily a principle of punishment. If you understand how punishment works, that would be complete nonsense to even think that, like, I would never consider.
So, but you have to look at their other constraints in there. So, having been a cop for 4.5 decades, I can tell you that if I wrote somebody a ticket for no good reason, for no reason at all, I'd have to face consequences for my own department. So in other words, those adverse consequences are behavioral cost that outweighs the momentary reinforcement of writing that person a ticket. So the analogy there, I don't think is perfect. And I will tell you, you talk about there's a different culture. Like, you go to most cities, you will find the officers there are less likely to write tickets than would be a state trooper on the highway. State troopers on the highway, their job is to write tickets. Their culture is built around, trying to improve general traffic safety by making everybody a little afraid of the consequences of driving fast, tailgating, aggressive driving, drunk driving, fill in the blanks. Their job is to write tickets, a lot of them, compared to the typical officer in patrol, which is different than the officers in that very same department who ride motorcycles. The motorcycle officers, they're primary traffic enforcement. They're a bit more like troopers, are kind of somewhere in between them. And some of them are very likely to write things where other people would give people a break. Now, for example, I always had a 3-strike rule. If I stopped somebody, I gave them 3 strikes, and I would only write 1 of the 3. That was just my personal rule that would go in there. And the strikes could be, you had one taillight out, you didn't have your registration, you were going more than 10 miles an hour. For every 5 miles an hour, maybe that was a strike. I don't know. But the idea to go that everybody will find some way to keep themselves comfortable. And I'll tell you that I never developed comfort writing more tickets. In fact, for a brief period, I was out of K-9 when I was in the Army, and I went to traffic, and I hated it. I hated writing tickets for a living. I hated writing tickets and investigating accidents for a living. It just was too mundane and boring for me. It just wasn't my cup of tea. There are other people that would be their jam and not mine. And so Skinner would call these private events. And I don't know that. When you talk to John Arstad, and I think he has a handle on the idea that there are internal states that affect the way we behave, the way our dogs behave, and things like that, in ways that we don't anticipate. And that the application of punishment, so take the traffic ticket example. Let's go back to a dog example. Dog aggresses at the living room window at passersby on the sidewalk. Right? And so someone finds that they can put an electronic collar on a dog, and they can interrupt that with an aversive electric shock. A stimulus like that will interrupt that aggressing at the person on the other side of the glass, the other side of the yard, walking on the sidewalk. that will interrupt.
Mhm.
And I've seen this enough time with canine handlers that, for example, the analogy is barking in a car. So they like a lot of dogs, you'll drive around fine all day long. Then cops will do what they do. They'll pull up car to car to talk with each other, and they'll have a great conversation. They'll pull up at first, the dogs will be barking, they settle down, and they'll have their conversation. And as soon as one of those cops puts their car in gear, that dog will get up and start firing up. And if there's another dog in the other car, that dog will start firing up, and they do that. And handlers will, I've watched them press electronic collar buttons to stop the dog barking from that point. And at that point, what I find is they start finding more and more reasons to press the button more often. And that's an easy behavior to get rid of without using aversives.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to use the shock collar to get rid of it. It's one of those things where, I spent with one of those at one of the international canine conferences with Bob Eden. I was working there with Mark Ficcadeni, who was the trainer for St. Paul at the time, and Annie Jimenez, who was with Anaheim at the time. And we had guys doing car to car, and I just said, okay, you're going to shape the absence of the behavior with positive reinforcement. And the guy said, look, I've been sitting there, I built a pulley system on the roll cage of my car so that I could give that dog a leash correction for this. And in 45 minutes, I've gotten farther with him with this than I did using that pulley system.
Of course.
And all that good stuff.
Of course.
And it doesn't always work that easy. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes less, but I see the possibility there. And there's one of those times where earlier in my career, believe me, I used e-collars. I went through school with Jim and Phyllis Dobbs, with the old Tritronics system, their 3-action introduction. Brian Mowry was their assistant at that seminar.
Yeah,
who's now in very special federal service.
Yeah,
these are people that are very skilled at this, and I got good at using it. But I also found over time that I didn't need to use it as much as I thought.
Absolutely, believe you. Yeah, and I don't agree with how even the Dobbs this is whatever they were doing. It was something they did at the time. Hopefully, it's not that way. And I agree with what you're saying. My disagreement with that notion is that when somebody is using it too much, it's out of desperation and lack of knowledge.
I 100% agree.
But that's not to say that they are that the punishment makes them do more punishment. They just don't know.
Why not? If it worked in this one thing, what is it about human nature that says maybe it'll work here?
Yeah, but it did not work.
It worked long enough to give them a moment of relief.
No, that's the thing. That's my. If they continue to use, and randomly is almost wrong to say, but use it frequently, more frequently than they need it.
Yeah.
It's not because they're reinforced, but because they don't have an answer to a problem, and they're desperate to have an answer.
I agree with you, but I don't think it's an either or.
Well,
I think it's a both and. I think it is both things. I think it is a lack of skill and a lack of understanding, coupled with the reinforcing power of relief. Momentary though it may be, impermanent though it may be, it happens enough that it, coupled with that lack of knowledge, they say, I don't know how to do this the right way, but I know how to press this button.
Right. Yeah. So this is incorrect.
So it's a downhill slide. And look, and this is where one of those things where I'm going to I'm going to make people unhappy with me one way or the other. I'm not a fan of using e-collars as a frequent tool in training. I understand it. I understand why people do it. I can usually choose and find ways that I don't need to do it, and I feel comfortable with that. At the same time, I don't believe in banning them. I don't believe in banning tools, I believe in education. I believe that people need to be taught, because with that knowledge, and part of that knowledge is you have to be careful with this particular tool because it has the power to make you want to push its button again. And so, and that's not the only thing. I mean, it's like I said, it's a both and, not an either or.
Yeah. So
and
go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm not in favor of bans. I'm in favor of education. And I know that my positive reinforcement friends are going to disagree with that. And like I said, I haven't got a working e-collar in my equipment inventory right now. Haven't needed it. If I do at some point, I will think about it, but that's just me. But at the same time, I do this, but I also think they shouldn't be something that somebody can just buy off the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, we can talk about this further, and I like that you have that position. I was wondering about that, and I was planning to ask you about that for sure, about the banning, because I mean, you know my position, obviously, from all the podcasts that I do. It's not gonna, it absolutely will bring nothing. But anyway, the Zidman's concern, I spend a lot of time in research. I cannot find any like empirical evidence, any studies, anything that actually proves that statement, that if you use punishment, you end up doing more punishment because it reinforces you, it makes you, whatever words we want to put. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but this happens because of desperation and lack of knowledge. I cannot, like, I'm not the kind of trainer to say I've used it only 3 times in my life, or I use it X number of times. I use it when I feel that I can bring clarity much faster and move on. And I'm not talking about any levels. Levels are relevant, very relevant, which I want to talk about the rules of punishment, but kind of stuck a little bit on that Zidman's idea that punishment makes you want to do more. You punish when? Yeah, typically, when you want a different result, a different outcome of what's happening. And when you don't have the answers and you don't have the knowledge, sure, you do more of the same.
There's the both end.
But this is not to say that you're doing it because of some gratification and some kind of, you like to torture animals.
So tell me something. Just from I'm
yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
If behavior increases particularly in frequency, isn't that by definition behavior that's been reinforced?
No, not always.
So what is it?
Really not always. Sometimes.
So what's the mechanism then? So I really would love to know more about the mechanism then.
Yeah, as I said, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. You have a screwdriver in your hand, and you're using that screwdriver for anything that needs other tools. Mm-hmm. But that's your knowledge, and maybe there is a Phillips, and maybe there is pliers, and maybe there is different tools, but you know that everybody, or for whatever reason, you're stuck with that screwdriver. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is education for you if you're not that person, because again there is pathological examples. You're in a police world, you see people do dumb shit on purpose, but this is not this should not be this blank statement that that's how it goes. That's very misleading.
We may have to agree to
sure.
disagree on this one, because I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. And I think that the propensity for punishment to be reinforcing to the punisher is inversely correlated with the amount of knowledge knowledge the person has. That as their knowledge goes up, the propensity to do this goes to be reinforced by it goes down. So I think you have a point to make there. In fact, I'll give you an example. Somebody who I disagree with completely with his training methods, but I've watched him do it. Internationally known e-collar trainer, e-collar all the time. Everything is taught with negative reinforcement from the very beginning.
Yeah.
All right. We probably are thinking of the same person.
We are.
And I will tell you, when that person applies it, he has absolute ice water in his veins. No emotional response, very neutral. It's just business for him. And he will tell you that in the early stages, he found that his frustration with dog's performance got in the way of his effectiveness, and he had to learn to curb his frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's an example of why this is a both and, because he realized that the emotional piece on this, and he had to learn more about the tool and more about his self and to control himself in using it. So this is one of those things where I don't think we're going to solve this in this podcast.
Right.
But I think we can say that the indiscriminate use by the untrained is a big risk.
I cannot not agree with that. I mean, of course I cannot, I absolutely would agree with that. But that doesn't still justify that statement that punishment becomes a reinforcer to the punisher.
Okay.
Here's
one where we agree to disagree.
Right.
I'm not saying I disagree with you.
I'm judging it to myself.
I'm just saying that I don't see another mechanism that increases frequency.
Yeah. Desperation.
And by definition, increased frequency is reinforced, is behavior that's been reinforced.
It's desperation. It's looking for answers. It's trying to be the best you can be, but you don't have.
So is release.
It's kind of what Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Is desperation reinforcing? In other words, is that momentary relief from desperation is reinforcing? It gives you that moment to, like, I got relief from this and I pressed the button. You don't think so?
No, absolutely
okay.
no.
So
absolutely no. Like
if I model it a little differently.
Yeah, if I just look at myself, I have not one time used punishment with, I'm gonna like, I don't know what words to say. It's like the punishment always comes contingently when needed. And it has to work. It has to have some benefit. The temporary benefit that you are hinting on, it's not like just because you're doing it more and more, that should be already a wake-up call. But it cannot be a wake-up call for somebody that doesn't have the knowledge. I firmly believe that 99% of the trainers, they want an outcome. They're not stuck on how they get the outcome, but they want an outcome. And they want the easy clarity outcome that's gonna come. So this is why I'm saying that if somebody is pressing the button and is punishing, I don't think they're happy. I think they're progressively actually getting more frustrated.
I agree.
And that's not a reinforcement.
I 100% agree. I absolutely agree with that.
Okay.
I look at it, I look at the behavioral mechanism there, and you see frustration, and I see reinforcement. And I don't know if we can resolve that because, relief from frustration, though momentarily, I see as being a reinforcing event.
But there is there is the one study that comes to mind, the only one. And I've tried hard to dig them, and if anybody that listens or you to bring me some evidence to that statement, I would gladly look into it. And I am the kind of trainer that I can switch immediately when there is evidence to it. What was the study where they did and see, like you will tell me the name and the date and everything, and I cannot, but you will know what study I'm talking about.
The non-contingent shocks?
No. It was done with humans. They invited students, and they were supposed to be, some were supposed to be the experiment, but eventually there was the professor or the scientist that was saying, well, they asked the question to the person answers wrong, and then they shock him.
Oh, okay. I know the one you're talking about now.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I just had the name and it just slipped out of my
right.
head.
So,
Begins with M.
and they kept shocking, and of course, they were thinking that the person that's being shocked is the guinea pig, and they were the guinea pig. And they kept increasing the levels and keep punishing, and they were just following orders. But every single one of them, when asked, they would have not done that. They just felt trapped to do it because of the, again, psychology and human behavior. And that was the beautiful part of the study. But there was that element that shows that punishment is not really, I gotcha, I like it.
Yeah, it's the Milgram experiment.
Yeah. Okay.
So a couple of things in there, because some of those people refused to go through with it. Some of them stopped and said, no, I'm not going to go there.
Correct.
And there's also some evidence, some Swedish researchers have come up and actually have found, looking through the original data, that the study as written doesn't reflect all the data. It reflects some hand-picked data. So they're looking to see where there's going to be a different result on this. But that neither here nor there. The one thing about the Milgram experiment is, I think that you saw those people going through stress as they went through that process. People would laugh inappropriately, they would cry. There was begging with the the authority figure in the room to I don't want to do this. Don't make me. You have to do. You must comply, and all that stuff goes on there. And Milgram's goal on this was to show that the obedience to authority
correct,
is he was more concerned about why people became sympathizers with Nazis than he was about whether shock is an effective tool or
correct,
not for anything.
Correct, 100%.
And I guess.
But as the side note of the study, did they enjoy doing it?
No.
Right.
But no, they didn't. But that's also different than somebody coming. See, here's one of the things that I think I love about this. If I'm gonna throw something out there, and do you think if everybody had your knowledge and insight and ability to see clearly about what contingency were at play and to control your own emotions, if everybody had that, would you have any business? I would say no, but by definition, this supports your thing that there's a lack of training at play here. That people, you have business, people will come to you because they want to learn how to do something that you do well. Now, whether I teach the same thing you do, I don't think so, but people come to me because I teach something different than they see themselves able to examine. I had a canine handler come to me last year who'd been watching some IGP competitors doing healing with hand targeting. So the driving into the hand method of teaching the heel. And he ran into a problem as he was getting ready for his certification, that when he started leaning out his schedule, the dog started aggressing on him. That, like he'd go a certain number of steps and the dog would say, hey, I'm doing enough.
Yeah.
Dog would just come up and either bite his hand, then come up and bite him in the chest. And he was having a problem with this. And I said, well, why are you doing this type of healing? Why are you doing this thing that's this arousing approach to healing for you? I said, well, because, it looks good. Everybody says that this is the way to get tight attention to myself and all that stuff. I say, okay, great, but let's try something else. Let's just pay him. Change your paradigm of what healing is. Think of healing as attention in motion. That the first thing you dog is teach the dog to pay attention to you. Wherever he's standing, whatever it is, pay attention to you. And that, by the way, one of the times is while he's right beside you, he's paying attention to you. And then when you start moving, you pay him. And all I want you to do is just when you see him looking at you and he looks happy and you see his tongue relaxed and he's breathing relaxed, mark that and pay that. 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and all of a sudden, no more aggression on the handler. I watched 2 episodes of it in the previous 5 minutes. So 15 minutes, we got rid of. Yeah, he took it along, and now he's working on it, and he finds this stuff. That was my preferred way to do this. I know there are some people. I don't agree with it. I don't think you would be one of those people that if that dog turned on him at that point, they'd nick him. I disagree with it, and I chose a different path.
100%.
Some people will choose another.
Right.
And this handler has contacted me just the other day just to tell me I'm so happy with this dog, because this was going to be a make or break thing for them. And what broke his heart about it is if I can't have this dog because he's going to try and eat me or eat my kids, I can't have that. But he's the most awesome tracking dog I've ever had. And he says, that's the bread and butter. That's why we are here. That's why we exist. And I don't want to lose this great tracking dog because of this.
Yeah, and this is great. I mean, this is a great example, and this is what should be about.
I'm here with you.
Yeah, but again, that's a little bit not quite relevant to that statement. And if you find me any study that's been done that actually proves that, I'm very, very interested on
and
it.
So I don't know if there is a study that proves it. Okay, so I'm gonna grant you that. I'm gonna say that, but I'm gonna ask you, rather than just speaking about frustration, think about a behavioral mechanism. You know, whether it's Panksepp's work or whether it's Skinner's work or it's Stadden's work. Think of a behavioral mechanism that you can find that documents why the frequency of button pressing would go up. And we can talk about that at another time. But just like we'll both go do some homework.
Yeah, definitely. That would be absolutely cool to do. Yeah. So since we are on the rules of punishment, and I didn't know the ninth one just kind of came in. On your first one, there is the one that basically says punishment must be something the animal dislikes, which is true, and something
you'll work to avoid.
Something that the animal does not expect. That does not expect. Can you elaborate on this?
So I think a fair, because the unexpected piece is there's some dogs who know it's coming and then will say, and they've weathered the storm before, and they'll say it's worth it. So the classic example I can think of back in the old days when there were e-collars that had plugs that you would change, and you could have 3 levels on that one plug and whatever.
Yeah.
And you'd have dogs and the e-collar had a 10-second shutoff, right? So that you couldn't fry a dog, couldn't overstimulate it. You'd see dogs that would ride through one button push, the other button push, and then the double button push that gave you 3 levels on that for that 10 seconds. And then, if I just bear down and bite harder, I can ride through this. And I've seen some dogs, at that time, there were 5 plugs with 3 levels each, 15 levels. And so people would give them 5 and right off the bat with all 3, with both buttons. And you'd see some dogs, they would go, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, which comes to
right
your third rule of punishment is what you're hinting on right now, right?
It's both of it. And I think part of it is, so this unexpected piece ties with one of your disagreements with with low level, in that essentially the expectation that it's theirs can be created. And then the dogs develop a punishment callus and you run into a problem. So that's a piece of it there. But I also think there are some circumstances where the dog realizes it's being set up and will go that. So in other words, you want to get rid of the descriptive stimuli that tell them it's a setup, because pretty soon the avoidance of the problem behavior will be controlled by the context more than it will by the aversive. In other words, they'll go, nah, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do it today. You're not going to get a chance to shock me. And you see that. So, or throw a throw chain or whatever you're doing.
Right. Which still kind of, even that example falls down in some of the other rules that you have, like the do not expect, something that the dog does not expect. What exactly? It doesn't expect the level of intensity. It doesn't expect that maybe it will punish, maybe it will not get punished. What exactly the dog should not be expecting is where I'm not clear.
I think this one applies most often to the thing you described in your podcast about, say, for example, people who have used it for animal chasing. And it'll be that one thing where they never experienced before. You acclimate the dog to the collar, they get their exposure to this thing. They have they've never been exposed to the stimulus before. They get the shock, they deviate off, and you rinse and repeat a couple of times, and then they're probably less inclined to do that chase, or maybe you stopped it. And the point is, that's a context in which it should be unexpected. I think the other one is also in those things where
but what is the unexpected?
Callus.
I don't get what's the unexpected part in that, the first example that we.
So why did you put the collar on the dog for 3 days before you put him in front of the horse or the rabbit? To acclimate him to the collar, let him think it's not a consequence, right?
Okay, but this is so, like I can agree if, like I guess I'm suggesting that you elaborate in the number one that what you are implying.
So the way it's phrased now is
when
it must be something, for number one, the way it's phrased now, it must be something the dog will work to avoid. And this is a subjective experience unique to the individual.
Right. So there is, like in my world, and I talk about this, there is times when, yes, I want, if the dog is chewing on the cable to punish him. So maybe the dog does not expect it, and it's not coming from me. But just to say that, like I think this can be, to me, it's confusing, because when I say, well, the punishment must be something that the animal dislikes and something the animal does not expect, like we're talking of surprises. And if that's the case, then we basically we are surprising the dog with something that the dog is doing that's a bad idea to do. Which goes to your number 5.
About those one and dones.
Right.
Those things where you're trying to do the one and dones.
So when we talk about the number 5, the punishment must be associated with the behavior, but not with the trainer. Otherwise, the trainer becomes part of the punishment, and the animal starts fearing and dislikes the trainer.
Again, that's primarily for the one that you're talking about, where it's you described in your chasing one. So I'm going to go back to your podcast there, and that primarily on that. And I will tell you that I've seen plenty of examples in which the presence of the handler or the handler's movement towards their remote becomes a discriminative stimulus for, okay, I better comply now. In other words, if they don't see the handler, or they don't see the handler reaching for the remote, then it becomes, so that tells me that they're attending to the handler, and rather than thinking about the behavior itself and about the path to reinforcement itself. So that, and I see that as problematic. I see that getting in the way of the connection with the handler. I see that getting in the way of clarity about the behavior itself.
It can, but it would be a product more so because of non-contingent use than if it's coming from the handler or not.
How do you mean non-contingent use?
I mean, you take all the studies going down to Matthias Schindler and Van der Bork, and the dogs basically being afraid of the person, being afraid to enter the training area, and so on. This is all, like you walk into a booby-trapped room and you don't want to walk there because nothing makes sense. If you know that there is a bad switch on the wall and you don't fuck around with it, life is good. Mm-hmm. So this is what I mean by contingent, non-contingent. And if and not me, I can speak for many trainers that use, if you use punishment, and I actually, there is the two types. There is the one that it's very important for me to make you believe that car stinged you back, that cable did that, or the hole you're digging, or whatever. And that comes without me. But there is also very important times that I want you to know that you're doing something that I don't want you to do.
And that I have the power to enforce.
But it's very contingent on your actions. Mm-hmm. When that's clear, and when I have a relationship with the animal, the dog never thinks of you as a boogeyman that just kind of gonna use the collar because you said so. It just never happens. If that was to happen, it will not be only on those studies with non-contingent use, but we would be seeing it all over the place. Dogs will be shitting themselves, afraid of their owners. How often do we see that percentage-wise, if we look honestly in big picture, when training is done correctly? And this is, again, it comes down to being contingent, non-contingent, and following certain rules. You have to, just as you have to follow rules with positive reinforcement, right? Mm-hmm.
So
I don't have one dog that's afraid of me.
I'll put it this way. I think this is number 6 is tied to not just the electronic collar, but to almost any pain-delivering aversive tool. Prong collar, choke collar, e-collar, and in that, one of the things is you don't want to have the dogs have to see you make an overt movement to execute it. And this is one of the places where the electronic collar is superior to the physical tools, because all the other ones require gross motor movement, whereas the electronic collar requires nothing but the movement of one digit, one hand, one finger. And so that's one of the things where it's powerful. And if you look at it, it complies with the rules more consistently than the others. That said, I've seen problems, and I understand where you're coming from about wanting that dog to understand that you have the authority, you have the capacity to enforce your expectations in the face of noncompliance. That you want the dog to understand that there is an or else behind this. That in other words, do this or else. And if you deviate, that or else will occur. You'll feel discomfort, and you'll have a pathway to reinforcement after that. But I get it.
Right. Just because the again, it's like in the force-free world, that's a big statement that the so-called big fallout. Even in society, there is times where I would tell somebody, it's like, hey, I don't do that. Like I don't like you to do that. And when it's done appropriately, it never creates this kind of association where the person or the animal starts to fear or dislike. That's when it's non-contingent. That's when it's abuse of power. Like let's look at a mom with her puppies. I know I'm going to give you a good example, different example with that, because it's really a nature. We're programmed for it, right? And you've heard me talking about we're genetically, it's baked in the DNA. We approach something that we like and we avoid something that we don't, and we can expand on that as much as we want. You have a mother, and I've been breeding since '89, and I don't know how many times I've went through alphabet. I really can talk about puppies and mothers, and from firsthand experiences. When a mother says, enough, you don't eat anymore from me, and taps on the puppy, and the puppy goes away, it doesn't mean that the puppy never comes back. Now, we have different mothers that by the time the puppies are 2 weeks old, maybe 6 or 7 of them are already dead because there is something wrong pathologically. And she's not just punishing them, she's killing them for no reason. As they grow up a little more and they start to walk around, and mom is eating and they come to her food, and mom shows her teeth, and they're like, okay, I've learned my lesson, I go away. But there is the bully, and so, no, I'm gonna work my way, I'm gonna sneak, I'm gonna lick her face and whatever, and mom goes, boom, and the puppy thinks he died, and he's like, whoa, 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 and he goes away. Sometimes she actually goes, because part of punishment, there is a reconciliation moment. She actually goes back, and she licks him because he blew his anal glands. And nature kind of calls for that reconciliation because of the anal glands. She doesn't just go because she knows, but the puppy is smelling weird, so she's going, but that's what the puppy wants at the moment. It's like, okay, I get that contact, moms. And we move on. And there is no one leader of puppies, and I'm, again, talking about my own experience, that, and all of them sooner or later get punished, knowingly that mom does that they fear her in that sense. So there is a respect, right? There is a respect, there is rules, there is boundaries, there is whatever we want to go to, but there is never that bond between mom and puppy is never broken. They never, ever go to that dark place because of that punishment event.
Yeah.
So, going back to, the not associated with the trainer, not associated with the mom, or not associated, because it creates fear towards, or it creates disliking. I don't agree with that. I'm not saying that that's not possible. That's definitely possible, but it's possible because of non-contingent. Yeah.
The human equivalent of the example of this, the human equivalent is the example I gave you, the handler whose dog was coming after him during the healing exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we both agreed that nicking the dog for doing that wasn't the ideal solution, that actually rearranging the contingencies, changing the expectation, setting the dog up for reinforcement worked just as well.
Right.
Yes. I'm a firm believer that reconciliation is, if you're going to use aversive, you got to have a path to reconciliation. No doubt about it. Because if you don't have a path to reconciliation, you won't ever have, you won't have a functional relationship. So I think you're absolutely right. In fact, that goes all the way back to the very first example I gave you today about the dogs running, about when the handlers approached the dogs while they were on the bite, what they did. And all of those dogs who would spin that around, that was because that those dogs expected they were going to wind up having the aversive of being taken off the bite, whether it's whether they felt pain in the process or it was just having the negative punishment of getting
Right.
to lose the bite, one way or the other, they felt, bummer. I'm gonna try and stop this as much as I can. And if we can get to the point where we don't need to have an active reconciliation, I think we're better off. If we can, so that's my goal. When I try to do this, I don't want to have to come in and try and create a situation where I have to reconcile and restore my relationship with my animal. And that's just me. That's my choice. And that's the way I try to set it up for the people I train.
Okay. So, but I mean, we're picking on the reconciliation part, which is important, but it's not always needed either. It's not that mom has to do that every time. It's not that I have to do that every time. Based on contingency, based on and this is why I hate watching YouTube trainers and taking the leash of somebody that the dog doesn't know nothing, doesn't like people, and that big guy takes it and suppresses the shit out of the dog, out of place. Like should not have this kind of following, but it's a whole different story. Let's simplify it. Do you, since you know, we do clicker, you do clicker, I don't, but how do you feel about having no or whatever word to tell the dog to stop something, that it's on the wrong path?
I actually like to teach it as a negative punish marker. So I have a similar language to Michael. You know how Michael Ellis describes his language he has with dogs with the five different types of markers. I have a similar approach, and I believe that there's the power of conditioning. You know, the Pavlovian power of conditioning is worth harnessing, and it's going to happen when you're training with operant procedures, whether you like it or not. Anytime Bob Bailey has said it, and I will quote him when he says, anytime you're using operant conditioning, Pavlov is on your shoulder. All right. And you ignore Pavlov at your peril. So if I'm going to use a negative reinforcement procedure, then I can harness the power of conditioning to attach a marker to it and save and use it sometimes to interrupt behavior without having to actually apply or withdraw the thing that the animal wants in that moment. And that can be sufficient. I try to use it sparingly because I'll tell you what, we've had this debate today about whether punishment is reinforcing to the punisher. I know people.
By the way, I hope you enjoying the conversation as much as I do, because
I am.
Okay.
Okay. Look, this is one of those things that when there is disagreement and we have passionate feelings about what we're doing, yes, we do this, but I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm trying to understand you.
I'm ready to be persuaded.
And I'm trying to get you to understand me.
100%.
And so that's where I'm at. I consider this a dialectic as opposed to a debate.
I love it.
As far and dialectic is about trying to pursue truth and understanding on this. So, going back to where was I on this? When we were talking about
giving a no.
Oh yeah. So, but I try to use it sparingly because that verbal marker that I see, whether it's for a positive punisher or a negative punisher, I wind up seeing people start using it more and more and more and more. In other words, I see what starts once as something carefully and consciously applied. All of a sudden, it starts coming out of people's mouths for every other little thing, just like we talked about with pushing the button. And so for me, for you see that as a product of frustration and lack of skill that they don't have and all that stuff. I agree with you that is the piece there. And at the same time, I think that they get enough momentary relief from using it that it disrupts the animal's behavior, that they get reinforced for using it and are therefore more likely to use it again. We disagree on that and we can move on, but that's how I see it.
Yeah. So in your world, if like the classic example of I don't know if you did this, but we were at some point at school back in Europe. You know, you would get blindfolded and you would play the hot and cold game, and you definitely wanted the cold. Everybody that you would ask, it's like, please, tell me no and good. Please. Makes my life very easy. When we say, well, we will ignore and we will only reinforce, it's not the optimal solution. It's not the best for, like, if you're blindfolded, you would want to know if you're going the wrong way. Everybody would, right?
You know, I don't know if everybody would, but I think.
So you're saying you would rather go in a circle?
Beg pardon?
You would rather go in a no, like human. You're in a blindfold, and you walk into my room, and I want you to go all the way to the boombox and turn it on. This is our game. We're drinking and having fun. Would you rather have a signal that tells you that you're on the wrong path or no?
You know, because this is a variation of the training game, you know, where we do it without being blindfolded. We have an unknown skill, and we use markers to get people to do this. And I've been the subject in that game enough times where sometimes I don't want that marker, because I don't want that no marker, because it comes with exasperation from the person that's giving it. Whereas with others,
what do you mean by that?
That, you know, in other words, it comes emotionally loaded. Remember I said that I talked about that trainer we talked about that
let's say
absolute ice cold. So let me finish up.
Yeah.
And I know, for example, one of the students we had when we were doing the KPA Academy classes begged to be given information, wanted to know when they were wrong, and all that stuff. And other people said, nah, just tell me when I'm right. I'm fine trying all sorts of stuff until I get in the right direction. Just make sure your increments are fine enough that I can do that. So I think there's something to the individual on it. And so I'm willing to tailor what I do depending upon the animal. There are some animals that just getting a no is crushing.
For sure.
And then there are others,
depending how they look at it.
There are others that not getting the no is insanely frustrating. So I let the animal guide me in my process on that.
So I think, like, my take on this is it's a matter of motivation. So let's say we raise the stake here, and I say, well, if you get to the boombox and you play the music within certain amount of time, you will receive X amount of dollars. Now, you have motivation, which typically, when you look at dogs and people, whenever we're doing something, we actually have the motivation to be successful. In this moment, would you still argue that not having the cold signal? Because it's very different when it's just, well, I'm gonna play a game and I'm gonna figure it out and I have a lot of time and I'm really gonna play around with it. That's not typically the case. Dogs have motive, they're very goal-oriented. They're like, okay, I need to do this. And I'm like, this is the right way to do it as far as I can tell. And me telling you that this is not necessarily the right way, and you looking up at me as somebody that's actually guide you. That's kind of why I sent you that one video with the young female with the toy earlier this morning. Like, and purposefully I kind of raised the criteria to where she was making mistakes, but she had very high motivation to go along and play a game with me. I had to establish rules. Now, could I have not tell her no and work around it through some differential reinforcement program and negative punishment? Yeah, but how much would I lost of that game and the moment of the interaction. And how did the dog respond to me telling her you're on the wrong path?
No, obviously you were able to make progress. So don't get me wrong. And I think that's one of those things where in that moment you made a decision on the fly to give that dog the information. That's not going to work. This is what's going to work. You go from there. And there would be times for some dogs when I might do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say a fair number of times what I'll do is, knowing where I hit this wall, I'll assume that I asked more than I prepared the animal to deliver. So I'll make an adjustment along, in other words, between where I had success and where I hit that failure point. And then I'll give them another shot at that. And let's see if we can do that and then shape up to that point from there. So that's just the way I choose to do it,
Right.
rather than giving them a no or at or whatever, or that's not working. I know some people who will say oopsie, and that means no, that path isn't going to work. I don't care what your marker is, because I've seen a fair number of animals some animals when they don't get feedback, they get frustrated. Other animals, when they're told they're wrong, they get frustrated. And so I try and let the animal tell me which is going to work best for them. And that takes feeling them out. And that takes a moment or two. Some animals you can click with right away, and some you kind of got to take a little more moment to find out what the dance with them is. And I prefer the latter of those two methods. I prefer to figure out a success point in between where I knew I was successful and where I failed, and give them a shot at that and see if I can shape up from quickly, because I think I give the animal more agency at that point in picking the path. It's, because one of the things, particularly with detector dogs, is way too many detector dogs are handler dependent. And so the more I can, particularly for dogs that are going to be doing scent work, the more I can make them less dependent upon the handler for answers, the more successful I'm going to be in the long run with them. So that's how I bias my training. That's the way I look for it that way.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I mean, it definitely can work, and it does work. You've been doing it forever, and there is many trainers that are approaching that path.
Ivan, it's hard to teach. It's hard to teach people. It's easier to teach people how to play the hot cold game. We're all familiar with it. And I think in many ways, you're right. That blindfold analogy makes people amenable to that. Instead of play a little warmer game, instead of the hot cold game, takes more work, but it's paid dividends for me, and I feel comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, cool. There is this one with immediately after the behavior, the punishment has to happen, and immediately after, what exactly that means?
So, as soon as I try not to. I would try not to apply an aversive before the behavior occurred, trying to take a preemptive strike.
Perfect.
Right?
Absolutely.
Don't believe in that.
Absolutely.
And
should never happen.
I try and catch them. Like, for example, let's take your example. I don't do this, but let's say it's the example of chasing cars or chasing sheep. Then the moment the animal has locked in focus that I can confirm on the object they're not supposed to, and they take a step in the direction of the chase, is the moment I would apply. That, in other words, that absolutely going out there. And I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I'm trying to give you an idea of what immediacy is. And I got to have this, because I'll tell you, one of the things that I've seen, particularly when I used to work with a bird dog trainer years ago, after I first got out of the Army, I was out there throwing dummies and throwing birds and shooting shotguns for a bird dog trainer by the name of Doug Orr out here in Western Washington. great work, fun stuff. Not a positive reinforcement guy. I wasn't there yet. And he had early electronic collars. And one of the things I will tell you that I saw were particularly on when he was teaching dogs send outs and he wanted them going straight. And he was trying to keep them straight on line and they veered off. They happened to be looking at a stump or a puddle or something like that. He'd nick them. Then they had aversions. Now, that is not a clean application of the tool. We understand that. And that's why this is so hard to do about being sure the animal's focused where you need it, takes that proximal step towards the behavior you don't want, and then you interrupt. That's a lot of moving parts for people to get right. And I think just before, like we said, timing is the hallmark of a good trainer, and criterion shift is the hallmark of a great trainer. It's the true mark of effectiveness. You have to have both in this too. Everything you need to be a good marker-based trainer with positive reinforcement applies to the use of aversives. And you better have chops. You had better, and see, I think this is one of the biases I have towards positive reinforcement-based training is not that you can't get yourself in trouble with a clicker and a bag of treats, but I think that the long-term damage you can do with indiscriminate use of aversives can be more detrimental. And so that's another reason I bias in that direction, because it keeps people out. And I wait until somebody shows me that they can handle a clicker and treats with timing and understand criteria shift before I would ever think of giving them the power to apply an aversive. So in other words, show me that you've got the skills, because like I said, for me, for what I've seen now, and I've come to believe that the skill of the trainer is a more reliable predictor than any particular method or tools that are employed. I've seen people do stuff that I wouldn't do, and they have happy dogs, really happy dogs. Okay, more power to them. If those dogs are truly happy and I see those dogs tails wagging, enjoying life, enjoying time with their human beings, time with other, then I'm like, yeah, that's cool. All right, that's fine.
Right.
Not for me.
Right. Yeah, I totally get it. Going back to what you said with the reinforcement and punishment and the immediacy on the punishment, when you like the dog doing something, you would mark or signal. I signal, most people mark, and that's a different conversation why. But you will announce that they are on the right track. And then eventually they will get paid. Punishment is not that different. If I have my dog on a downstay, I don't know, like I'm just pulling out of my hat things. It may not be the best example, but whatever, the dog is doing something out there. He has no collars whatsoever. And I cannot immediately deliver an aversive. I can tell him this is not acceptable and this is the consequence. Just as I can say, oh, this is exactly what I see, and you will get your payday. It's not that different.
So, but in other words, if the signal or the marker is a bridging stimulus that bridges the time between when the animal did the behavior that earned the reinforcement and when you can deliver that reinforcer, right? So it's a conditioned reinforcer, whether it's a signal, a marker, or a bridge, whatever you want to call it. You have to condition that. Now, you not only have to condition it so the dog makes the association between the sound and the reinforcer, but you also have to condition the amount of time. You can lengthen the amount of time between when you deliver if you've taught the dog to withstand that. But initially, you're paying quickly with the marker. I would assume that you have to do the same thing with aversives, to condition it and teach the dog that when I say this, you're going to get the aversive. And early on, there's a close association, then later on you stretch it out. I just don't want to go through that process.
Okay. Yeah, and that I have no problem with that. But it's not necessarily a rule that a rule of punishment that because it's one of the big argument of the positive people that it has to happen that moment, and because you cannot happen at that moment, therefore you're gonna not do it right.
So let's take a look at that though, because reinforcement, do we agree that reinforcement is a process, not a thing? In other words, the ball's not the reinforcement. The ball is the vehicle for a reinforcement process with you, the ball on the rope. When you showed me that video today, the process for reinforcement for the release was the access to the ball again, and you had a great time playing the game. So in other words, the object becomes the vehicle. Reinforcement is that process. And it begins with your marker. In other words, I mark the behavior I like, and then we start the reinforcement process. So in that regard, the marker has to be contiguous, has to be timed tightly with the behavior that you're trying to reinforce. You can't deliver your okay 9 seconds after the behavior and expect the dog to get it, because they've done 15 behaviors by then and they don't know which one earned it. So in that regard, it is timed with this because your verbal conditioned punisher starts the clock, and it is tightly timed with the misbehavior, because otherwise it wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't work.
Correct. So, yeah, we agree there.
Okay, cool.
We agree, absolutely agree. It's very interesting. Like I love talking to you right now, because it's a conversation that I typically just don't have the opportunity to have, and I appreciate that we're going back and forth, because I know that I'm gonna go back once this whole podcast is done, and I'm gonna listen myself to it, and I'm gonna get way more out of that. So
same here. So and this is one of the things, because we both came into this conversation with some trepidation, because we know there are people that might not want this conversation to happen,
right,
because of where we respectively stand on what we do. And I submit to you, and I submit to everybody listening to this podcast, is the only hope we have to influence other people is by interacting with them.
Yeah.
The argument that not platforming somebody or not discussing with somebody with whom we disagree is a path to change, I think is disconnected. I'm not here trying to change you, but I do hope to have influence on you.
100%. 100%. This is why I'm saying I would listen a few times to this, because of that idea, because I never think that it's really like I am always right, but I want to converse. I don't like to say evidence says or science says and point me to a study that I can point out to so many holes to that study. That kind of collaboration and eventually meeting into trainings and doing things, I can 100% go, you're hats off that you actually stood your ground on this, because you convinced me. And I'm absolutely not afraid or shamed or anything about this. I think this is the only way going forward.
This has been a really cool conversation. I've enjoyed this, and yeah, we have this point of disagreement on some things,
right?
And we got to figure out, for the sake of the dogs we work with, how we resolve this when we interact with other people besides ourselves, besides you and me.
Yeah.
When we move out here, maybe something I said will land in a way on someone else you're talking to in a way that helps you get to them, and vice versa.
That's it. Tell me about more kind of difficult questions. The whole dominance problem.
What about it? What I mean,
does it exist? What is it?
Dominance exists. I just don't know if I don't know if it's useful in dog training as a lot of people think it is. In other words, the notion of exerting dominance or the dog's attempting to exert dominance over us. Because the definitions vary on this. But
Right.
from what I understand, probably the easiest definition I can wrap my head around is the dominant individual in a situation is the one that in conflict comes out with what it wants.
Right, right, and we can call it authority. We can call it so many different names, but it's the individual insisting on it's going to be my way kind of thing.
So understand this. Here's the problem. That applies in all sorts of paradigms. People think it applies to a physical confrontation between two individuals over an object or a thing of that. But if you're a prisoner of war and I control your access to food and water, if you don't do what I want, you don't get your bread and water, much less all the tasty stuff. Would that be me exerting dominance over you?
You're enforcing yourself and your demands on me.
And how far different is that than when we use food for training?
Right.
So there's an argument to be made, some people will make, that it's just where we choose that all training consists of exertion of control over another being, over that dog. Since we're dog trainers and we're talking about this in this all training, whether you're use purely appetitive tools of food and markers, clickers, whatever you want, whistles, you name it, or you're somebody that uses aversive tools, they're all there. It's just where you choose to fall on the spectrum. And, so if you look at the Lima movement, the least intrusive means available, there's certain things in there, but I will give, as much as Susan Friedman wants to give animals as much choice in making the decisions in the training process as possible, she does acknowledge that it still entails a degree of coercive control because you're controlling access to something the animal wants from that. And there are some who say you're going to take away as much of that coercive control as you possibly can, give the animals as much freedom. So, for example, Skinner kept his animals below optimal body weight to keep them in a state of deprivation so that he would get higher performance. There are people out now like Barbara Heidenreich and others who have an active movement, particularly in the bird training realm, about keeping animals at their ideal body weight, healthy that way, so they're not in that state of deprivation. And guess what? They argued that they get actually less frantic performance, more clear. And Steve Martin was another one who will tell you the animals perform better when they're not in a state of deprivation, when they're clear-headed. So the dog training community, the horse training community, the human training community has got to rethink what the limits of aversive control are, because they're bigger than they think they are. And, we just went through years of COVID restrictions and things like that, mask requirements and vaccine requirements and things like that. Whatever you believe about whether those were for the good of the people overall and all that good stuff, one way or the other, they were instituted with coercive control. Somebody somewhere made the decision, the cost-benefit analysis of doing this was worth the cost that you face with aversive control.
I mean, reinforcement and punishment, it's all about controlling behavior.
Yeah.
It's all about controlling behavior.
Yeah,
now, when we look at the side effects, the downfalls, the problems, we can say that, okay, yeah, punishment using aversive can have not great outcome. But then when we look at when is that happening, it's clearly that when it's not used correctly. So that's kind of where my take is just that it's just not fair to throw it away altogether.
Right. Right. But we have to be mindful about this. We have to think about this.
Right.
And we have to,
I will give you
long ago,
an
there was a book
example.
called Yes or No, The Guide to Making Better Decisions
Mm-hmm.
by Ken Blanchard. One of those little 1 Minute Manager series books. But the brilliance of this book is its whole premise is making your decisions with a cool head and a warm heart. And I think dog training is exactly that. Whatever your method, you need to come into it with a cool head and a warm heart.
Yeah, and we need to learn. We need to learn. That's bottom line. We need to get better at understanding and not scratching things out. It's a very, very interesting stuff. And but back to the dominance factor. It very similar, like with the use of aversive, we can say just like go as far as to say that it doesn't exist. It's so misleading, in my opinion, on both ends. And when we think about like how many trainers really do you think are out there wanting to torture dogs?
The vast majority don't. I
Right.
think we agree that everybody, whatever their approach, gets into this trying to do something that they think is going to benefit
Right.
society and benefit the animals
Right.
that they work with.
So,
And, as far as dominance is concerned, like I said, it exists because there's a competition. There's when there's competition for resources or competitions for something desirable, there's potential for conflict.
yes.
Okay, great. That dog Astro that bit me in 1975 at Lackland. All right. There's not a doubt in my mind. Plenty of people would describe him as a dominant dog. And I would say, looking back on it, it wasn't so much that it was a dominant dog. It was a dog that yearned to be treated fairly.
Yeah, trying to anticipate, because this is the one of the interesting things about social creatures. It's like you and I are I'm trying to judge how you're gonna act in the next moment, and I'm judging it by what? By my own personal previous experience. So there is a huge possibility, and most likely that's what happened, I don't know, but the dog just decided to beat you to it because of who knows what was in his head.
Oh no, he didn't beat me to it. I was in the process of applying aversives, and he came around on me. All right, it's Texas. It's 106 degrees. We're on a pad, on an asphalt drill pad, trying to get the dog to lie down. He's got a 16-inch neck, and I got a 22-inch choke chain.
Right.
And they want us to snug it up, slide it through our hand, hold on to that chain, and hold it to the ground. My hands were sweaty. I'm an oily person to begin with. That thing just slipped through my hands. He had enough room, and tried to bite me once, tried to bite me twice. Third time, I said, okay, no matter what, I'm not going to let go. I'm not going to take defensive action. I'm going to keep this thing down there. That thing slid out, and all of a sudden I go, oh my gosh, that hurts.
Yeah. So
Next thing I know, I've got it. And you know what? As soon as I let go of the chain, he let go of my hand.
Yeah. Because
Now,
the way he
say,
interpreted is like you said, let's go to war, and he's like, okay, I'm coming to war.
Yeah.
Right.
That wasn't dominance.
Right.
That was an act of self-defense. I'm not proud of that, except for it's propelling me on my journey. It's an integral piece of who I am now as a trainer. And for that, I owe Astro a debt of gratitude. And he's long gone, but not in my memory.
It is crazy how they have you just go in the kennel and turn around and, well, that's your dog. That's just the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
Tell me one. I know we were talking quite a bit, but you stopped me. I try to understand the new, the changing of words, and there is a meaning behind, and there is reason behind. And I really, like, you would be the first person that hopefully I can get some insight on this. Like, what is the difference now? Why are we all of a sudden calling the owners guardians?
I think there's a segment of the population in the dog community that realize, that don't want to think of the dog as a piece of property. If you are an owner, then you own a piece of property. And they want to change us to start thinking less as something that owns property, can do with it what it will, as guardians who are responsible for the welfare. Now, we who have called ourselves dog owners for years before this may have just assumed that the responsibility for the welfare of the animal comes with ownership, but I think they want the term to be clear for us, that our job is that. And I may be oversimplifying it. I think there may be pieces also other than that, but that to me is the clearest explanation. I know, for example, in the police academy in Washington State, the past commander, one of the commanders, when that commander came in at the academy, changed the writing on the wall from having a warrior mindset to having a guardian's mindset. That they want us to think of us as guardians of the people in our communities as opposed to warriors surviving a conflict. And the warrior mindset was designed to help officers get through those instances where people wanted to kill us. And they're there. I mean, look, the reality is firefighters file more claims for injury than police officers. Loggers get injured, die on the job more often than police officers do on a per capita basis. But we're the only profession that with regularity are subject to intentional violence by other people. And so that development of the warrior mindset was designed to overcome that, because a lot of cops back in the 80s were getting killed. San Diego was a prime example. That has changed now. The expectations in our community is that we will be guardians, that we will be there to help keep them safe, and that we are not at war with them. Now, does that mean that when the time comes to apply force, we can't do so decisively and effectively in accordance with the law? No. It means that we could still do all of that stuff, but you come into it with the mindset of a guardian as opposed to a warrior. I think the same thing can be said, that the attempt to control the language that way and to shift the language, not control it, but just shift the language away from ownership to guardianship is about the welfare of the animal.
So could that go too far off the rails somehow?
Anything can go too far. Socrates, all things in moderation.
Right. Where does consent come into place? Because they kind of seem like maybe are tied together in some, or no?
I think so. When there's ownership, you can do what you want with your property. Your property, you can do what you want. That's what it goes. When there's guardianship, now all of a sudden you have to think about it. Like, put it this way. I have my stepdaughter has the most gorgeous 11-month-old baby boy. All right. I'm sorry, everybody else in the world, this kid is the cutest little sucker on the planet. The rest of you can just take a break and know that Maverick Bondar is like awesome.
Cheers to Maverick.
All right. His mother is not that baby's owner. Our society recognizes that she cannot do anything she wants to him, that she is instead that child's legal guardian, and that there are limits to what we can do. I understand your concern about maybe on the dog realm, this may go too far, and some of the things that you want or the tools that you use may come under prescription. And I can see where that could go. I can also understand that this notion of guardianship is one that if we do it right, if we get the education, because I'll tell you, in the 11 months that this child has been on there, this woman has had the expectations of what it would be to a mother shattered into a million little pieces to find out that it is nothing but sleep deprivation like you've never known before. Perpetual work, a workload that never stops all day long, all night long, period. And all of a sudden, so in other words, you think you like the idea of being a mom, but the reality is that it's brutally hard, interminable work. And ownership of a dog is one thing. Guardianship of a dog, either way, whatever name you give with it, I believe that when I was going to, you should have proper support. And I've made mistakes. I have had dogs where I have not taken proper care, and I've run afoul of my own standards on this. So I can say without a doubt that I'm a firm believer that whether you call it ownership or whether it's guardianship, the standard for yourself for care for that animal should be the same.
Right.
You should come into it with the same warm heart and cool head.
Yeah, and we should have, and we do have, I mean, we do have so much regulations and welfare, and I mean, that's why animal care and control exists, and that's, there is a problem of how much, like I tell you, like in Florida, for example, there was a few years back, quite a few years back, a big thing. It's like, let's ban, what was it called, the actual term when you chain dogs outside? And
tethering?
Yeah. So they passed the law, and it's good, makes total sense, and made everybody feel good. 10 or 15 years later, what do you think's going on? Nothing. And that's a sad part.
So in other words, the dogs are still being tethered?
Of course they are.
Okay.
You should come to my side of the world here. And if they're not, then there is the other option that every time I drive my road, I am cringing because I'm going to see a dead dog, or I'm going to try to catch a dog. Like I pretty much once a month catch a dog. And it's so, it just freaks me out because like I stop and I'm like, do I want to freak the dog out now and get him killed because I'm trying to catch him, or do I, it's a nightmare. But, you know, this is roadkill. And it's very hard to find the right thing to do. And where I'm going with this is just passing laws and changing names. It's not enough.
No. This is one of the things where I think that's why people, their attempt in changing, the attempt to change the language, the shift in language from ownership to guardianship is one to attempt to shift the way people feel about their role with dogs. And think about it. Maybe somebody who truly believes that they're a guardian for that dog won't put him out on a tether, won't let him run loose on the highway, and you won't have to go chase him. I know a lot of other trainers that do a whole lot of different training methods than you that wouldn't chase as many dogs per year as you do. All right. You know, by your description, that's a ton of times that you got to do that. And it's
heartbreaking.
That's, you know, but here's the thing. When I grew up, every dog in our now in New York City, no, but in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, every dog in the neighborhood was loose and running around. They all would get together and meet us at the bus stop and walk us back to our homes.
Right.
They would walk to the bus stop with us in the morning, the school bus stop in the morning, and they were loose running around all day long. Only come in and maybe only to the garage at night.
Someday on a different podcast, I'm going to tell you and everybody a story of me growing up and having, like I grew up with homeless street dogs and going into the dens and I trained my first protection dog. It's a super cool story, but not for right now. I think we did quite a, like I totally love this podcast. To
We
wrap,
covered a lot of ground.
I know we've been all over the place as I was expecting, and like I'm super happy.
3 3/4 hours worth of fun and frogs, man.
And everybody will enjoy it. Everybody will have opinion. People will agree and disagree, and that's what's about. Let's talk. What do you want to see in the next 10 years?
What do I want to see in the next 10 years? I'm going to talk about my community only, my law enforcement canine community. And I want to see a big shift in the emphasis in training. And I'd also like to see the selection of dogs that people have to choose from not being a bunch of dogs that are only prepared for a selection test, but dogs that are truly well-rounded and relaxed. My first mentor, Larry Franklin, who is the first training master for the Seattle Canine Unit, would pick dogs that I think other police trainers wouldn't take. He'd look at a group and he would not take the biggest, the strongest, the hardest, the sharpest. He wanted that middle of the road dog. And what he wanted was one he called self-right. That's a dog that is so relaxed and comfortable, so confident that it doesn't sweat anything. It goes through life relaxed, not worrying, never looking for a fight, but perfectly content to end one if a fight comes its way. And a dog that's really curious. It wants to check things out in this world. I want to see dogs like that coming from Eastern Europe. Most of the dogs we get come from Eastern Europe. They're bred for a selection test at the Police Dog Center, Holland. My vendor runs them through it. You get that dog, you know what they're going to do. And I know that the vendor I went with knew I was going to look at 10 dogs and take one, maybe two. And he would pre-select out of the 10. Once he knew what I wanted, he would only give me something in the direction that I wanted. And what would break the selection process for me is I'd take them off site, away from the kennel, and we'd go to the big local feed store there in town, where there were sights and sounds and smells they'd never seen before. And I just looked to see how their behavior changed. And if I saw a dog that was stable all the way through that, then yeah, that was on my list. That's the dog I wanted. Because I could teach them what I need to teach them. But the internal stability, the self-right quality is that. And I want to see dogs like that come in there. Oh, and by the way, that's what I want for the cops that have those dogs.
Right.
Not somebody that's trying to prove something, but somebody who's so self-right that they know they don't have to go out and look for a fight. But when one comes their way, they'll do what they have to. They'll get it over with and go take care of the paperwork.
Yeah, I remember.
That's what I want for my law enforcement canine community. For the civilian community, let's stop fighting with each other and try and figure out how we can move forward for the best for the animals altogether. I just figure out, we don't all have to do the same thing, but we have to figure out how we can get to the point where we can look at the outcomes of the animals and say, yeah, this animal's happy and it's got a good life. And that's what we want. Yeah. So there's my 4 wishes.
Very good. How about staying on the police side of things? I just did a podcast with Debbie Zapier, and she has this American Schutzhund right now. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that podcast. It just came out.
I haven't listened to it. I saw it come up, and I haven't listened to it yet.
And we did a part.
But I really want to hear what she has to say.
Yes, we did part 2, and basically, my wish on that side of things is that we, meaning like the sport trainers and the police trainers, start to have some events together, start to mingle more, start to have, like what she's doing with that American Schutzhund. She's truly gonna, if this is to go for another 5 years, there will be dogs that will come out, that there will be a very interesting, real good selection that's gonna come out with the dogs that you would like to have. And I think if we find ways to connect and have events together, we have more even with numbers, we have more numbers, we have big community, and we have similar interests, and we have interest in this kind of dogs, that we want dogs that, I'm not going to repeat what you said, because I just have to repeat exactly what you said. But this is the kind of dogs that we're looking for. And, like we should be able to start doing something in the country that can be very special and very beneficial for both sides.
I think the potential to get the dog genetics is high, but we have to figure out how to do it cost effectively. It's hard for raising a well-rounded dog to the age of 18 months. Mm-hmm. Is not an inexpensive proposition. And at some point you have to figure out, how do we handle the economics of this? Mm-hmm. And, the True. Eastern European dogs that are raised only for the selection test, their expenses are much lower there, and they're only doing the minimum it takes to get them to that point. And believe me, we've had superb police dogs out of it. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it took a lot. I didn't start at ground zero. I had to tear down some foundation to get to the animal I want to start building and shaping behaviors. So the 16-week academy winds up getting stretched longer sometimes as we sit there and kind of object possession. Big one. Almost right. All of them are frantic to possess the object, and they have no idea. You mean there's a game with this? We can have fun with this thing? Right. You're not just going to try and take it away from me? Oh, you mean if I let it go, you give me a better game than the one I had a minute ago? If I let it go again, that's it. I get an even better game than that? Okay, I'm in. But they don't believe it. Right. It's like somebody, you try to open the doors to heaven and say, here you are. Or imagine that you actually go through the doors to your local Walmart, and there it's heaven in front of you. It's never been this way before. Yeah. I don't believe it. That's kind of what those dogs are facing. Like, all of a sudden, you're not going to thrash me. You're not going to sit there and take this thing away from me, choke me to get it back. I mean, it rocks their world. Yeah. But once they believe it, you own them. They love it. Like I said, our dogs think that their day-to-day life is the best game of hide and seek and tug of war ever. Yeah, who knows? It might be. I know the prices are still going up because there is demand. But at least in a training aspect, we should be trying to look for some collaboration and have some fun. Oh, yeah. Train. But and I think it's not just between Schützen and law enforcement. I think you should throw in search and rescue people. Yeah, and you 100%. And I think the other competition sports have something to offer too, that we can. I'm a big believer in cross-pollination. I'm a big believer that anybody that's good, like, if you looked at all of your podcasts, which one do you think was the one that I just said, this one here tears down a whole bunch of notions, a whole bunch of ideas that people have about things? And for me, that was the Susan Garrett podcast. And then there was difficulty in there. You guys were trying to persuade each other about things, and there's all this stuff. And I'm just going to say that thing, because what I saw was two people who are without a doubt, indisputably at the top of their sport, who train differently. And yet they still manage to get dogs that love life, that love the work, and are performing. It's not just about the performance, but they perform, and they have the dogs have a joie de vivre. And so for me, the Susan Garrett podcast was one where I said, look, this is proof that it's not either or, that there's overlap, more overlap here than we are willing to admit. And with that, I hope for healing for our community, for the dog training community. And I think that's kind of where I want to end this thing, because I'm just like, that's my biggest hope, is that we can find healing in our community. Our nation's torn. We need healing in a whole bunch of ways. And it would be cool if the dog training community could take the lead in this one. Now, maybe I'm a pie-eyed optimist, a cock-eyed optimist that says that, but man, that's a hill that's worth dying on.
Yeah, I'm with you. Steve, it was an absolute pleasure having this
100%.
conversation. Looking forward to see you again somewhere in person to talk dogs and training, because that's what we do.
Yep. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am grateful.
Thank you.
Take care,
Steve.
man.
Take care.
All right.